Good evening, and welcome to the Ojai City Council special meeting, Monday, May 22nd, 2023. May we have the roll call, please? We have a quorum.
Yes, Mayor.
Thank you, Weston.
Mayor Sticks?
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Francina?
Here.
Councilmember Rule?
Here.
Councilmember Lang?
Here.
Councilmember Whitman?
Here.
Thank you, Weston. James, will you please lead us in the pledge?
Yes, Mayor. Thank you. The flag is towards the front of the room behind the council. So I'll ask everybody to join me in standing. Right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, James. Approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve?
I'll move to approve.
Okay, and a second?
I'll second it.
Okay, all in favor? Aye. Okay, wonderful. All right, we will move on to general public comment. And there also will be public comment before each one of the items, agenda item 1 and 2. So just a reminder that this is the time set aside during the meeting for members of the public to address the city council on items of city business that are not on the agenda. And it's a 3-minute time period, so please respect the chime. And council members, please refrain from debating with the public. And we've had several requests to state whether you're a resident or non-resident. So we do have a little box down here. So if you check the box, I will say.
It's not against the law to ask. We can't force anybody.
No. So if the
Correct.
box is checked, I will say what is there. And just a reminder, this was a recommendation from former Mayor Carol Smith. And at the time, the council agreed that we would do this. So that's what we're doing. Okay, so let's begin with William Wyrick, then Larry Steingold, then Robin Gerber.
And Mayor, if I may, in public, the 3-minute timer will be right here below the clerk's desk.
Just have a general comment, peripherally related to the Brown Act matter, but more about an attitude of governing the city and in approaching the challenge of governing. And I hope you'll indulge me in the 3 minutes. I'd like to start by reading the preamble to the Brown Act. The legislature finds and declares that the public commissions, board, and councils and the other public agencies in the state exist to aid in the conduct of the people's business. It is the intent of the law that their actions be taken openly and that the deliberations be conducted openly. The people of this state do not yield their sovereignty to the agencies which serve them. The people in delegating authority do not give their public servants the right to decide what is good for the people to know and what is good for them, not good for them to know. The people insist on remaining informed so they can retain control over the instruments they have created. I don't think this council has demonstrated fidelity to legislative intent. And frankly, I also believe that the two people you've hired have not insisted on fidelity to that legislative intent. And that's tragic because we're sitting here spending a lot of time, fair amount of money probably, don't know the exact contract with the consultant, to engage in something which is really just common sense. The burden of proof is not doing anything not openly. It's a high burden of proof. This council, this staff has not acted on that presumption and unfortunately undermined the integrity of governance for the entire community. It's tragic. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Next, we have Renee Roth, then Dee Reed, and then Larry Steingold.
Hello, my name is Renee Roth. I live in Ojai. I am a resident of the city of Ojai. I want to start off a little bit differently about a commitment to public service. What is a commitment to public service? Public servants are committed, in my opinion, to reflecting on their roles and responsibilities. They are committed to test and measure their values, their ethics, and their actions as they serve the government and the people of our city. We all come in with a personal bias. But as elected officials, the time to think about what is best for the residents of Ojai is now, not your personal friends, not those who got you elected, or those who have an agenda that they want to see carried out. So how do we do that? We have city attorneys and city managers who help guide us on what are in the best interests and following the laws of this great state to help guide you along your way. But we need guidance. We need collaboration. We need ethical considerations to identify our own personal bias and make a commitment to diversity, equity, and cultural inclusiveness for our community. So to change course a little bit here, I do want to welcome our speaker, Miss Anne Ravel. I believe that's how you say it, with the Fair Political Practices Board. And I do think that the responsibility of enforcing the California Code, and especially provisions of the election code that have to do with officials recusing themselves, is a very important part, especially when they have knowledge of a participant's financial interest in a proceeding, which is what the law states. We have asked Mayor Sticks on several occasions to recuse herself. Specifically, I hope you can begin to address the many conflicts of interest involving Ojai's Mayor Betsy Sticks, who sent confidential emails relating to the lawsuits filed against the city of Ojai for acting on behalf of Simply Ojai. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Renee. Mr. City Attorney, just to confirm the statement about the emails confidentiality, they were shared, so they would not have been confidential, correct?
It's not clear what emails the public commenter is referring to. I'm
Okay.
not sure I have enough information to provide
Okay.
advice in this moment.
Never mind. All right, thank you. Dee, did you want to speak on item number 1 or? Okay, I'll wait. Okay, thank you. Larry Steingold, then John Drucker, and then Robin Gerber.
Larry Steingold, good afternoon, resident. Are you recording, Weston? Are you recording this?
Yes. Is the timer going?
And you can control the video and audio?
No.
You can't. Oh, good. So make sure everything is done correctly. So I'd like to be recorded. I want to thank Mr. Vega and Ms. Lindy Palmer for the roads and for the summer activities, and for the gentleman
Gomez.
over at Sarzati. It
Luis
was wonderful.
Gomez, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
It was packed. There were kids everywhere. And that's wonderful. And please keep up the good work. I think it's great. Thank you for the roads. We're all waiting to see asphalt paved and ground up, and for the new list coming out in a couple of weeks to see whose roads are not being paved for the next 3 years. Huh? Can't hear me? Oh, okay, sorry. Because I assume the Maricopa is going forward, so I would like you all to ask Matt Levere, who's running for re-election, for $3 million. I'd also like you to ask Mr. Bennett and Ms. Limon for the money, because everybody else in the country seems to be making bank, and we're here going to be sucking wind, and we're going to now have to ask 1 million people to pay a higher TOT and a higher sales tax, and they're all coming from Mr. Bennett's and Mr. Levere and everywhere else's location. So you should all get together and ask him unanimously this evening to please give us $3 million to help all the residents here who have to put up with 1 million visitors. And that's what I'd like. So thank you very much and have a nice evening.
Thank you, Larry. Next we have John Drucker and then Robin Gerber.
And real quick, while they're coming up, just to that point, we can't talk about that tonight because it's not on the agenda, but I assume the council heard you and will act as they see fit.
Can we agendize it?
So tomorrow tomorrow night, everybody can join us for tomorrow night as well, 6 o'clock. We have our CIP review and it can be discussed. at
Okay,
that.
thank you.
Good evening. I'm John Drucker. I'm a business resident of Ojai and Leslie Rule's attorney in this sad affair. Leslie and I believe that she did not violate the Brown Act, but the DA disagrees, saying we should have gone to him first and only, and that Ms. Rule stated too many facts expressing her opinion. Basically alleges that Leslie did the right thing, exposing the council's wrongdoing, but in the wrong way. And we can live with that. And a knowledge of history is comforting as well. When Daniel Ellsberg gave the Pentagon Papers to the New York Times and Washington Post exposing the government's secret bombing of Laos and Cambodia, he was criminally prosecuted for divulging state secrets. But he was soon vindicated in court and then went on to innumerable prizes and awards from the many, many organizations that appreciate the transparency that he brought to government. Now, Leslie, you're not as significant a whistleblower as Daniel Ellsberg, and Mayor Sticks, your wrongdoing, while inexcusable and unforgivable, are not equivalent to the secret bombing of Cambodia. But we find contentment in knowing that when you do what is right, you can take pride and things usually work out for the best. The city attorney, Mr. Summers, though, takes a different approach. Addressing his memo in detail would take me an hour, but a few things leap out. First, he is saying, we did nothing wrong, but I recommend we commit to fully comply with the DA's demand to cease and desist, but only to avoid litigation and because it requires no admission that we did anything wrong. In short, it's a commitment to keep doing what he's been doing and what you've been doing while placating the DA. Now, there are only two things I don't like about anyone who endorses this approach: their face. Second, Mr. Summers is always looking for justifications to keep council deliberations secret instead of seeking the openness that the Brown Act strives for. That is on you. And third, Mr. Summers' entire defense is at best based on an expansive reading of exceptions allowing for closed sessions, rather than the narrow reading the law requires. Just because you can say an issue relates in some tangential way to the agendized item does not make it a proper topic for a closed session discussion. Quite the contrary. As I've been saying since January 24th, Mr. Summers was a main cause of the Brown Act violations here. First, he neglected to police the December closed session to keep you from straying off the topic of the Simply OI lawsuit. And then he changed the topic of the closed sessions for January 9th, but he neglected to change the statement of the agenda. That is 3 acts of negligence that laid the groundwork for the ensuing violations here. Accordingly, Mr. Summers is unfit as city attorney and much too close. He does not have the necessary distance to
Thank you,
provide
John.
any.
Thank you, John. Time's up.
1 second. As Leslie's attorney, I would ask for 10 more seconds.
Out of fairness. Thank you. Next, we have Robin Gerber.
Well, can't I just have a peaceful transition to the microphone? The first thing I want to say, Robin Gerber, I live here in Ojai, and first thing I want to say is Councilmember Lang. I only recently had a chance to see the video of the last council session, and I was shocked, frankly, and horrified by the comments of your partner. I like to think of Ojai as a more open and accepting and loving place. So I am so sorry that that happened to you. So we are going, just to clarify, we are going to have item 2 on the agenda, the resolution. Okay.
So it'll be on the agenda whether or not council takes action is up.
I see.
Is
Okay.
pending.
Then I will hold this comment, but I do want to say this. I have been advocating for a code of ethics here long before any of you except for Souza were on the council. I came here from Washington, D.C., where I was a lobbyist and an attorney, and I was frankly shocked that this city didn't have a code of ethics. So I am hopeful now that we will get there, that it will be strong, that this issue of recusal will be handled by that. If we had the same language as the city of Ventura, it would be very clear that there was a recusal needed for you, Mayor, but we don't have that. And many other cities have the kind of language that I think would work very well here in restoring trust in the people in you and in you with each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. Weston, any comments online?
No raised hands, Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Well, we will move on to item number 1, the workshop, Brown Act and Transparency Workshop. James, introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a brief introduction. Thank you everybody for attending the workshop tonight. There have been a lot of questions and concerns related to the Brown Act and how it's followed and whether we follow it correctly and transparency. And I think even more with the district attorney's letter coming out last week. So we thank you for joining us for this discussion. There's 2 items on the agenda tonight. And we'll start with the first, which is intended to be a Brown Act and Transparency Workshop to give some overview about the Brown Act, talk about how it works for the city and why there are things like closed session and what needs to be reported out and sort of the basics of the Brown Act and transparency. The second item, which was added after the DA's letter, is considering a response to the DA's letter. And so that'll be sort of part 2. But we're starting here today with the Brown Act and Transparency Workshop. And I just wanted to take a moment to introduce our guest speaker, Anne Revelle. And she'll give a little bit more thorough of an introduction, but her qualifications are quite impressive. She's the adjunct professor of ethics, professional responsibility, and campaign finance at the University of California, Berkeley Law School, a former Federal Election Commission chair nominated by President Barack Obama and unanimously confirmed by the Senate, which I don't think we hear that happening very often anymore. And also served as the chair of the California Fair Political Practices Commission. And so we thank her really for coming out and doing this. I think after flying across country, she drove down today to do this. So we really appreciate it. And Anne's going to start with an overview, but really one of the ways we decided we wanted to set this up is allow plenty of time for interaction and questions. So that'll be part of the intent of how we hold the Brown Act and Transparency Workshop. And so with that, I will introduce Anne and I will hand it over. So my recommendation is to take them after the presentation. Just because we may speak to the questions that come up. So
Are we going to have we had talked about potentially having an opening statement from council members?
So that is council's choice. I believe I informed the council that there may be a request to have an opening statement, and that can be a request made at this time.
So is it an official motion?
It can be, or it could just be, by consensus, or if it's not clear, then there may need to be a vote on it.
I mean, I ask how do you feel okay about that?
Absolutely.
Okay, then I'll make the request with a council member rule to allow her opening statement. If
Everybody's opening statement. If everybody has one. I mean, that was kind of the idea, was that if you chose to make an opening statement, you would have the option to do so.
I'm going to hold my comments until I hear more.
Okay, that's fine.
Actually, I would prefer to hear from Anne as well before I make comments, because she might address something in her statement that would change the way my thoughts about the whole scenario and what happened. So I would be interested in hearing from you first.
I would agree with that. The goal tonight is to learn, and so we have an expert here. I would love to hear from you first.
So are we going to take a vote on it?
It's not counterproductive.
I mean, you can keep your comments as long as whenever you want. I would like to have a statement.
We'll have time. Yeah.
No, I'm asking for a statement and we can take a vote.
If one
Probably a good idea to
council
take a
member
vote.
wants to make a statement, is it a long statement?
No,
Do you
it's a
want to
very
make a
short
motion?
statement. No, it's a very short statement.
Motion that council member will be allowed to make a short statement, and the rest of us will wait.
Or you can make it if you want.
Yeah.
I mean, this was something that I
You
had
wanna
brought
do it-
up.
You want to do it right now?
Yeah, it's a short statement. I do. It's an introductory statement.
I'd like to make a substitute motion to do it after we hear from the presenter. So,
Let's just get it over with. Come on.
anyone?
No.
I'll second the mayor's motion.
Okay, okay, can we have all in favor of waiting?
Aye.
No.
Aye.
No.
Okay, all right, we will wait. Thank you, Ann.
No. Welcome to our world.
And this is the problem.
This is the problem.
Right? It's just too much to make a statement, God
You know,
forbid.
I would like to ask the council to refrain from comments of that nature. And, you know, we voted, so let's go.
You're right, you voted.
Okay, so we'll take a breath and we'll give Ann a moment to prepare and we'll get started.
Should I start? Okay. No, I'm ready. First off, I want to thank you for inviting me here.
Oh, microphone on her.
I'm mic'd on. Yeah. Although happy to go anywhere that anybody prefers. No, thank you. No, I'm really very glad to be here to speak to you because these are issues of real importance to me and have been throughout my career in public service. I mean, in addition to the Federal Election Commission and the FPPC, I also was county council in Santa Clara County for many years. So I have been at every level of public service. And one of the things, and you spoke about public service, for me, what is really important here tonight, and I know there's concerns, and I've been asked to come because of transparency issues and closed session issues in the Brown Act, but I do want to say that what I see as public service, both by elected public officials as well as appointed, is exactly what you said. That is, we owe an obligation to the public, and that's why we're there. We're not there for the purpose of our own self-interest. It's for doing what is the best for the public. And the same is true in terms of transparency, because I am a really strong believer in transparency without any question at all. That has been a big aspect of my career, particularly in campaign finance issues, where transparency is so incredibly important so that the public can know about who's behind political campaigns, for one thing, and also so that in the state of California, not just the Brown Act, but there's requirements for Form 700s for information, financial information by all of the elected and appointed officials and people who work in government to be transparent about whether or not they're getting money that would put them in a conflict with the rest of the community and with the interests of the public. But with respect to the Brown Act, and I'd like to begin with that, the Brown Act was enacted in 1953. And the purposes, and you spoke about the preface to the Brown Act, which is definitely there, really important. And the purpose was so the public can participate in issues of their local agency, but also so that the public has a right to be informed about what is happening. However, I do have to say that, and while that, the importance of that and the importance of disclosure cannot be underestimated, but the Brown Act itself, when it was written, obviously was knowledgeable to the legislature that there needed to be exceptions to open and public meetings, that there are situations without any doubt that the city and the public needs to be protected about certain information. And those exceptions, while yes, they're supposed to be somewhat narrow, they're also very clearly enunciated in the Brown Act about what is required in a closed session in order to have a closed session. And those are things, if you look at that and you read all of the provisions about why there are those closed sessions, it is for the protection of the fisc of the city and the protection of the public, in fact, in certain things. And one of those is litigation. And as a lawyer, and a lady from who was in DC as a lawyer, you do not disclose your strategies in litigation publicly, because that is a detriment to the city when the city itself is involved in litigation. And the same is true for other aspects that are exemptions to the open meetings and are part of the closed sessions. One of those has to do with personnel and personnel evaluation, or in many instances, determinations to fire personnel. And those are things that should not be public, period. That is a decision of the council. Yes. No, I'm talking about the crown. Excuse me?
This is a workshop. This is a workshop. So
they can see me. Well, I didn't get instructions prior about where I could look.
yeah, this is a workshop, and I have let Ms. Ravel know that she's fine to speak to us and the public, and that we're all interacting. So thank you.
Right. So
excuse me, can we have a quiet, please, or excuse yourself? Thank you.
Right. So there are other aspects, and I understand, I mean, labor negotiations as well, and personnel evaluations, as we discussed, and real estate negotiations, because all of those too are matters that will impact directly the council and the public fisc. And as a result, the legislature, in what I consider to be great wisdom, decided that as to those discrete issues, there can be closed sessions and there should be closed sessions. And trust me, I have spent many years in closed sessions at the county level, and it was extremely important that those matters that could be disclosed publicly should be disclosed at the end of a closed session. But those matters that will create a problem for the public entity should not be disclosed, and legally do not have to be disclosed, because it will be to the detriment of the public agency. And that's why the issues surrounding the Brown Act, I mean, certainly transparency with respect to matters that are not going to be a detriment, that are going to be something where the public should weigh in, but the public is not going to weigh in on personnel matters. They're not going to weigh in, or should they, on litigation. They're not going to weigh in on real estate negotiations. And as that, those are things that are solely within the role of the council. And that's who should be there to discuss these issues and come to conclusions together. That's what a closed session is for. You all have to be there. And so it is not about public disclosure or having public input into those particular issues. So those are the major issues that I wanted to talk about. I was asked to also mention there are some other issues in the Brown Act that are of real great import in this context, and that has to do with communications not only amongst, of course, council members, but communications that are facilitated through third parties, say an employee or some other third party, where you are reaching a consensus on an issue outside of a meeting. And that is without question a problem and is illegal for the council to be reaching agreements without having an actual meeting that's agendized where you're discussing those issues. So that is really problematic, and it can be done by way also of technology. If there's emails that are trying to come to agreements on issues, especially if there's a majority, or on I guess there's other mechanisms, videos perhaps, and other kinds of mechanisms, any way where there's an attempt by a majority of the council to come to a conclusion without an actual meeting is illegal. And to go back to also the confidentiality of closed session, and I have the code sections here right in front of me.
Could we pause for a moment? Could we pause periodically to ask a question or to bring up? It's a workshop.
It's fine with me.
Yeah.
Right. It's fine with me.
I feel like
I'm
you
good.
just hit the nail on the head about decisions that were made outside of council meetings. And that's the real issue. When the new council was seated in December, and that meeting was followed by a closed session, it was apparent to me that there was already an agreement, or the appearances of an agreement, between the three new council members, the mayor and the two to the right of the mayor, based on discussions outside of city council meetings. And our city attorney, when I asked questions at the closed session, all of a sudden it was like his whole approach had changed because we had a new council majority. And I may have misinterpreted. My distinct recollection is that the city attorney said that he's now working for the new council majority. And one of those, he was in the previous council majority, he challenged one of the new members. But now it was like, instead of working for the community, for the city, for the whole council, he was suddenly biased in favor of the new council majority. I don't know if I'm making myself clear, but that's to me the dilemma. And it's been going on ever since.
And can we have a comment from?
Yes.
Of course you can. And I don't think that I'm in a position to be able to speak to that issue because I wasn't there.
But if I could just clear something up, then there is absolutely no factual basis. There was no decision that was made. We did not even talk about that. That is not, I want to be really clear. That never happened.
You never spoke with Sabrina Venskis or Tom Francis or Mayor Johnny or anybody else?
Hold on. This is not a trial. We're here to learn. We're also one at a time.
The underlying issue so that we can come together and work harmoniously as a council. There are certain issues that just have not been resolved. And my hope that in this workshop, we can air issues out and come to some kind of resolution so we can work together again.
Rachel.
Yeah. So when we were campaigning, I sought advice and help. And yes, when I was campaigning, I sought advice, help, and guidance from a number of people in this community, including Sabrina, including Tom, including Betsy, and others. My neighbors, I sought all kinds of advice and help. Never once in those conversations, did we talk about me voting any one specific way, or did we have any conversations about things that were agendized? In fact, if anything, those, Sabrina and Tom in particular, gave me so much information about the Brown Act that I went into every single meeting armed with what not to do. And then they gave me materials to study on my own. I basically went back to graduate school to understand the Brown Act. So I feel like I'm having one of those Serena Williams moments where she's accused of cheating and she says, I have a daughter. I'm not cheating. I am actually really, really offended by the notion that I would have violated a law, that I've taken an oath to protect the city. It's not. It absolutely nothing. I did not do that.
Just a second. Yeah, just 1 second. Miss Rule can be next, but I just want to,
If I could be next,
I just would like to say one thing though. Keep in mind that this is a workshop to learn about the Brown Act. It is not about flinging accusations that cannot be proved and that aren't true. So let's make sure to focus on policy, education, policy, education, and learning so that we can do our jobs efficiently.
Okay. So I do have to make a comment here. There is an email from Tom Francis saying that the new council members were on board with rescinding the Becker agreement. There is an email that says that. Now, whether or not you are aware of that, I don't know, but there is an email and that's what it says. It says that the new council members are on board for overturning the Becker agreement. So that's where that comes from. Okay. And we could go deeply into, how the campaign went, but as you say, you don't feel that was true. All the conversations you had, that's fine. That's not really what we're here for. But I will point out that in order to understand the way to move forward, we have to know where the issues are in the past. And and there's a lot of hurt and pain around all of this. Mr. City Attorney has attempted to sue me twice, has called me a litigant and a claimant in an action that I have no freaking idea what he was talking about. So there's a lot of this kind of stuff that is going on. And until we actually peel back the layers and take a look at it, we're not going to be able to figure out how to go forward. Yeah. And, you may not feel that you did that, but the chatter everywhere was that you did.
Yeah.
So, emails, I'm just talking about chatter is like what's in the ether.
And the city attorney made an assumption on how the new council majority felt. And I believe that Rachel is an honest person. I love her dearly. So I'm sorry if I didn't convey, my intention. But my question is, does the city attorney work for the council majority or work for what's truly ethical and right for the whole community and for the council as a whole? I'm confused about that. I'm not accusing, but that was my impression after the first closed session, that he wasn't working for the old council majority. He was working for the new council majority.
I'm happy to clarify that if I may.
Okay.
My client is the city.
Right.
The city is an institution. It is controlled by a board of directors, in this case, a city council. I work for the majority of the city council. I work for the majority direction from the city council. I do not work for some inchoate idea of the community other than the community as controlled by a majority of the city council. That is my client per all of the relevant rules, laws, and regulations. My client is the majority of the city council, as the council may direct the city to do something or not do something, or take an action or not take an action. So,
we will wait and take a public comment after
This
Ms.
is
Rizzo.
really fundamental.
I would like to hear Anne's response, excuse me, Ms. Ravel's,
It's quite all right.
to the concern expressed by Councilmember Francina and the response by the city attorney.
Right.
Because there's you may have heard there are people who doubt the job that's being done by the city attorney. I'm not one of them, but
Yeah, well, I think having been a county counsel and lawyer in a number of agencies, I think what Mr. Summers is the job. The job is to take direction from a majority of whether it be the Board of Supervisors or the county or whoever. I'm sorry. I do have the map. I'm sorry. Well, they've taken.
No, we haven't.
It's when there seems to be a consensus from a majority. I'm not commenting on your particular situation because I cannot. I'm just saying from my own experience, you need to, the city attorney or county counsel or whatever the lawyer is to a public agency takes direction from those who have made a determination about how to go forward. And you also give advice to those who request it. So I can't really immerse myself in Ojai politics. So, I just wanted to, I know.
Can I ask one follow-up
Happy
question?
to be here, but.
Can I ask one follow-up question? You have to have a determination by the majority first, though. I mean, you have to have put that out and the majority there has to have been a vote so that you can't assume what the majority is going to do. And I think that is the crux of the issue, is the decisions were made when had been taken no vote. So it was an assumption. And that is what Sousa is bringing up, is that the assumption before a vote is what happened. Not that, yes, the council directs you to do something. Yes, that's what you do. It's a council vote. But if there hasn't been a council vote, then if you're assuming a majority, because you're assuming a majority, and you go ahead and you act on that, that is what is incredibly dangerous. And in at least some opinions, that is what has occurred in Ojai. And so it's,
so I think it may be more dangerous to assume that there's been some type of conspiracy that's occurred that broke the law. I agree with what Council Member Lang said, and I'm very offended to suggest that there's been some, conspiracy to make decisions before we went into our first session of City Council. We didn't, it was very unclear to me what exactly we were going to be discussing in our first session, but I won't go into that. I'll also say that it's also inappropriate to take the statement of somebody else who says how somebody else believes and say, well, that's the way that person believes because this other person said that, referring to Tom Francis. I never had a conversation with Tom Francis where I told him that I would be voting in any particular way if the Becker agreement came in front of me. And I will point out, as to all of this garbage that we've been going through, and I'm sorry to say that, but we voted 5-0 on that proposition. And yet there has been the biggest storm that probably the City Council has ever seen, even though we were 100% in agreement about what to do. So I view this whole scenario that we've been dealing with, thousands of hours and dollars, to be political opportunism to try to derail a majority. And it's the way that America works today. If you got a majority, do everything you can to destroy.
I have to follow up.
Wait,
it's not true. No, you're not running the meeting,
Well,
so
I
it's
am
all
actually
good.
running the
Andrew, it was
meeting.
a 3-2 vote.
Excuse
It was
me.
a 3-2 vote. It was not.
Excuse me, Councilmember Rule. I am running the
Yes,
yes, I am. I am.
It's supposed to be a workshop.
Yes, and I am running the
Supposed to be a
meeting.
workshop.
Yes, but
It is supposed to be a
when
workshop.
people are
What was the vote on the referendum?
3-2.
No.
Yes, we voted 5-0 in closed session, my friend, and then we went out the next day and voted 3-2. Sorry.
I don't remember that.
Changed your vote.
Yeah.
You and Betsy changed
You
your
changed your vote, my friend.
All three of you changed your vote.
I would like to make a comment just to follow up because I don't tell people how I'm going to vote either. And I resent that accusation. And there's a small group of people who are not happy with the outcome of the last election. They lost 3 seats and
That's not
one,
true, Betsy.
excuse me, I'm going to finish my statement. One ballot initiative. And this group of people has spread lies and misinformation about the council members and me on social media, via email, in print, and in person. And huge waste of time, energy, and it's a travesty. So I would love for you to continue. Thank
Yeah.
you.
Well, I just want to answer one or respond again to the issue of the city attorney, because the city attorney's presence and there's no, going back to the Brown Act, the city attorney is there to brief the council and can speak to individual members. That is absolutely acceptable to do, because that is the way that the city attorney is ultimately going to get the information to be able to give best advice to the council as a whole. So just saying. And then I also wanted to mention, which I didn't previously when I was talking about the confidentiality of closed session, and you all probably know this, but the government code section 54963 says that a person may not disclose confidential closed session information without the consent of the legislative body, so that had held that closed session. So the city council would have to agree to allow that to happen. And under the law, under that code, that government code section, violations can be subjected to injunction or disciplinary action. And who can bring those? It could be the DA, but it could also be any other interested person who can bring such an injunction or request a disciplinary action. It does not have to be, they can start an action of mandamus or injunction or declaratory relief to stop or prevent violations or threatened violations of the Brown Act. So I think that's an important aspect of this that people need to know.
I actually have a very specific question about the Brown Act. So as has been deemed by the DA, we were out of scope on the Brown Act on all 3 of those closed sessions. The DA has said we were out of scope. My question to you is, once something is deemed out of scope, is it still privileged and confidential? So, because what I understand is once the DA, I mean, I was deemed, I violated confidentiality.
Mm-hmm.
And even though it was out of scope, he said that I needed to get a judgment from him that it was out of scope before, right? I could not, it is not up to me to unilaterally decide if something is out of scope.
I think that's
and
correct.
In order to do that. So once you get that, so we have that. We have a determination by the DA that all 3 of those closed sessions were out of scope, right? They weren't agendized properly. They were out of scope. What happens is that information now no longer privileged because it has been deemed out of scope. That is my question.
I don't believe that makes it not privileged, because if what you're talking about that the DA spoke to was the agenda and how it was agendized, but if there's some erroneous ability that they held a closed session, spoke about and came to certain conclusions, that might be different. So I think if the problem is a technical issue of the agenda in advance or reporting out, and what you're allowed to report out on. But out of scope doesn't mean that. I think what really that means is that it was not an appropriate closed session because it doesn't have any of those, doesn't meet with any of those exceptions that are permissible in a closed session. So to call it, I haven't seen the DA's.
You haven't seen the DA's letter?
No, I have not.
Okay.
And, and frankly,
You don't want
if the DA is saying that based on what was in the statements in advance of the closed session, and that what was discussed was different, I don't know how he should or she knows
Yeah.
that.
I'm trying to get clarity on when something veers off.
Mhm.
Okay, you veer off into tangential stuff. Like you're off. You're 6 degrees of separation or 4 degrees of separation
Mhm.
from where you started. Right.
It's better.
And the DA says that you have veered off. So it may not be a question that you can really answer. Maybe it's a question for the DA to really answer. But I'm curious when privilege stops, because it wasn't appropriate conversation. For instance, it wasn't the narrowly defined, it was causing exposure to the city, or it was strategy for illegal. It was something completely different. It wasn't related to the narrow exceptions of the Brown Act. That is, this has to be kept quiet because it's a strategy for a legal strategy. So therefore it is privileged. But yet in that same conversation, you go off and you talk about, the ducks in the park or whatever. Is that also privileged? It has, and I went way far off of the particular topic, but what we do in closed session is we hop and we jump. We start at point A, then we get to point B from point A, and then we get to point C from point B, and then we get to point D from point C, and now we're all of a sudden from point A to point D. And because we can connect them tangentially, that you can talk about anything that you want. And that's really what I need clarity on. It's like, can you only talk about the stuff that is narrowly protected by the Brown Act, which are those things that you discussed?
Well, right. In closed session, you can only discuss the matters that are in the exemptions that is in the Brown Act for the purpose of having a closed session. You cannot be discussing things that are beyond that unless they relate to those subjects.
And how close, I guess the question is, how closely do you need to relate? And who makes that determination?
Can I make a suggestion that we go round robin, because a couple
Sure.
other council members have questions. Rachel?
Sorry, I'm not.
Well, so there are times though when you're discussing a legal matter. Okay, there are times when we are discussing legal matters, and in defining the strategy for those legal matters, we have to discuss what are the consequences of each path. So, I mean, from my perspective, what we have talked about in our closed session meetings, that may seem tangential, is really about that strategy.
Right.
But how do you determine what is, what is, some of the consequences might seem like way out there, or might seem like they're not, that they're moving farther from the agenda, or farther from the agenda item, but they're still within the scope of that legal, the pending litigation or the existing litigation, correct?
Yes. If you are talking about what might be the complications or might be the outcomes or things like that, that is totally within the purview of that topic. It's topics that they exempt. And so, there are always going to be fulsome discussions in order to understand complexity of issues and how to make decisions. Like, okay, we're going to have some real estate negotiation, and we know that the developer wants this and what they want that, and this is what the complication might be. All of those things are within the scope of those negotiations, because presumably that's one way to inform the council as to how to go forward.
Thank you.
So
Andy?
So I'm an attorney, but in general,
Congratulations.
yeah, I can't say what I was going to say.
No, it's okay.
So, is it reasonable for council members in general? And I'll say that I have fallen into this category for these issues we're talking about, for us to rely upon our city attorney to guide us as to when we've gone beyond the scope of connection or reasonableness of a discussion? Or do we have to decide for ourselves if we've gone beyond? I can say that during, those meetings that we held, I believe that the city attorney was in control over what had to be in the notices and what had to be reported out and what had to be, how far we could discuss on a particular topic that might seem like it was getting tangential.
Right. I think you're exactly right. That's the role of the city attorney or any other staff that might be there to provide information about the issue. It does not have to just be the city attorney, but the city attorney can certainly be the person who is going to evaluate the constraints of the Brown Act and where you can go in terms of any tangential information. So you're absolutely right. You should be relying on the city attorney.
And then just one follow-up question. I mean, I do have an understanding that separate and apart from the Brown Act, whenever you have a conversation with an attorney about legal strategy, that discussion, communication is privileged without regard to the Brown Act, and that the privilege is held by the council as a whole, and no individual member may say, well, I'm going to choose to waive privilege and talk about what has been discussed with the entire body and the attorney giving the advice.
Yeah. You cannot do that. You cannot have a waiver of privilege of something in closed session that is partly advice from counsel, but just in general, you cannot do that.
So I have a follow-up question. Oh, okay. So our city attorney has stated and steadfastly believes that we were completely compliant with the Brown Act. The DA has said differently. So it's problematic. We have a problem here, and that's something that we need to resolve. We need to figure that one out because we did rely upon our attorney.
Mm-hmm.
But other attorneys had different interpretations, not unlike the DA's interpretation. And so we are in an awkward position, to say the least, because we did trust, or the majority of the council trusted, the opinion of our city attorney, also understanding that this was our first council meeting. We knew nothing about anything. Like, we didn't know anything about anything. We didn't know about having to report out. We didn't know about taking votes or not taking votes. So you don't have to report out, or you do have to report out. I mean, what we didn't know could fill this room, really, and did fill the room, quite honestly. But now here we are in a very strange position where we are between a rock and a hard place, because we did trust, or the majority of the council trusted, the opinion of our city attorney, and the DA has clearly, unequivocally said that is not correct. So where do we go from here?
Well,
so I just want to correct that statement, because the DA has heard from one council member And I can't speak for Souza, but I do know that the DA has not talked to Betsy Sticks and hasn't talked to Rachel Lang to find out the scope and extent of the discussion at that meeting. So a lot of the DA's opinion depends on an accurate statement of what was discussed. And, you know, one of the details that's missing from all of this that I think is very important is that the area of concern is discussing a threat of litigation by a developer. And so the question is whether that fit within the pending litigation definition or not. I've asked the questions about what we should be doing in terms of noticing out, and I've been consistently told by the city attorney that the threat of litigation that was made in an open council meeting, actually multiple times, that we would be sued if we didn't let the developer build the way the developer wanted to build. That was a threat of litigation, and I felt strongly that we needed to get legal advice on how much exposure we had if we didn't give the developer what the developer wanted.
Let me just respond to that, because yes, it's not just pending litigation. It's not just existing litigation. Threat of litigation is a valid reason to have a discussion. And it's certainly consequential to think about what the impact of that litigation will be for the city, because otherwise you cannot make. And when there are threats of litigation, it doesn't even need to be a person standing up in council and saying he's going to sue you. It can just be, you know, assumed because of certain behavior and things that other people have heard. That is a threat of litigation. And you certainly have to know, you know, what the consequences of that might be. So
well, we both want to go. And I just want to clarify something, especially for the public. The DA issues opinions, and please jump in. DA is not a judge.
Right.
And I echo Councilmember Whitman's comment that he really didn't have any information. He didn't talk to us, or, you know, he only had what was given to him about apparently what happened.
Talk to Matt.
And so I just wanted to clarify, you know, versus a grand jury makes findings.
And ultimately, it's good that you mentioned the bench, a judge, because ultimately those are the officials that have authority to tell you what to do or not to do with respect to whether it's be the Brown Act violations or some other kind of failure to report out.
One other comment I'll make, and then I have a question. So I have been going back through my notes, and I take very, very detailed notes of closed sessions. I mean, like, I could be a court reporter with these notes. And it is documented that the questions of pending litigation fell within the agenda items that were discussed in that closed session. And so I just want to echo my fellow council members' sentiments that the DA does not have, that there was never an investigation. And so my questions related to that, Matt and James, I was wondering, since we did not have conversations or were not involved in investigation, I was wondering if you spoke with the district attorney.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. I did speak with the district attorney a couple of times. He asked, sort of, when the complaint first came in, he asked me what response did I have. He also asked if the city would agree voluntarily to record closed sessions as another remedy aside from the remedy he sought now. As the council is aware, and I think that has been reported publicly in the prior reporting out from the last closed session on this topic, I told him I had no power to agree to record closed sessions. That had to be a council decision, but that we would certainly have that discussion, which was diverted into this workshop per the council's direction. I also did lay out a brief overview of the facts, but I was handcuffed in doing so because I could not reveal closed session discussions. The gist of what I explained to the district attorney is what's contained in the public memo that I put in the agenda packet regarding the legal conclusion that the topics that were discussed, my legal conclusion, the topics that were discussed in closed session regarding the Simply Ojai lawsuit, which challenges the approval of the development agreement in full as violating CEQA, the planning and zoning law, the city's municipal code, and other applicable laws, that discussion included a discussion of how to respond to the lawsuit. One of the options of which was removing the lawsuit entirely by, as was then a choice, the council rescinding the development agreement per the referendum and the consequences and options thereof. As is obvious that and I stand behind it strongly, my legal advice is that that's a lawful discussion in a pending litigation closed session because the discussion was in sum how to end the lawsuit another way as was then pending. As noted later, the council decided to send the referendum to the voters, which put the lawsuit on pause where it is now. And that's also lawful. The policy choice controls is made by a majority of the city council. As is obvious, the district attorney disagrees, as other lawyers in the room. I think this is one of those things where you get 4 lawyers and you get 18 opinions, and it is what it is. I stand behind my advice to the council, but recognizing, as noted and is on the second agenda item, the district attorney has more power than I do. So there is an opportunity for the council to avoid litigation from him and his office, and that is the second item on tonight's agenda.
And if I'll answer the question too, just for the record. I did not reach out to the district attorney. I think Matt used the phrase handcuffed, and I think to some extent that's how I felt. I think that I did not feel like it would be transparent of me to have an offline conversation with the DA to try to sway the DA. So I chose to stay away from it. So I did not have a conversation with the DA.
And I'll just say that I did ask whether I should or could contact the DA, and I was advised that that could be viewed as tampering with the DA's investigation.
So I think it's important that we have this discussion and that all of the things that some people, people think that, I broke privilege. I think that they were way out of line in the conversations that were being had. And, I was really concerned with the things that were going on, scared the hell out of me, to tell you the truth. So we could just keep delving into that, or we can figure out where we go from here. I mean, the things around, a proper agendizing, letting the public know what issue we're discussing would be very important. A report out that the whole council agrees on, a vote on any decision that's made. So it has to be reported out. The kinds of things that will stop this from happening again, I think are really important. And I think now all of us are a lot more cognizant of what the Brown Act is. And perhaps we can even decide, it is a council decision if we have veered too far off the subject or not. Ultimately, if we don't feel we want to go there, or if we feel like this is not serving the public, right? I 100% believe that we were keeping secrets from the public. It was agendized as it was agendized, but there were things going on in there that were, to me, 100% keeping secrets from the public. So that's the way I felt about it. Okay, the DA said, you did wrong. Okay, perfect. I had a long conversation with him. I understand, but I think we need to figure out how to move forward. What are the checks and balances that we can put in place so this does not happen again? Like, we have, who can call closed sessions? There's only one council member here who can call closed sessions and doesn't need a second, just can decide to call them. That's problematic. That's not a check and balance. There are things we have in our protocols document, something that is oh God, what do you call it when you have to disclose who you talk to? No. It's ex parte. We have an ex parte. Like, who have you talked to anyone who has this issue in front of us? If so, could you please disclose? We've never even broached that, but that's at least in our protocols. So if someone has something in front of us and you have talked to them about it, you should disclose it. And you should disclose what it was you talked about, those kinds of things. You know, and then there are checks and balances that we can put in place. And I think that for us, we had none of them in place because we didn't know. We just didn't know. We didn't know that you could and should report out. We didn't know that you didn't have to have a closed session. It was a choice. We always agendized a closed session, and then we would go in and decide if we needed to have a closed session. But we're already there. We're already in the closed session. You know, those kinds of things that you know, default to secrecy, and they default to lack of transparency as opposed to defaulting. And this is the biggest question. This was really my statement. We have been defaulting to a lack of transparency, right? Because as Matt has said, and I don't think this was in closed session, you know, anything you put out there makes you more vulnerable. So don't put anything out there. Put whatever, you know, don't put anything out there. I exaggerate here, but put out as little as you possibly can because you're safer that way. But that's not the way Ojai works. The way Ojai works is tell us everything that you can and keep secret or those things that would adversely affect the city, that would adversely affect the city if they were known. That's the question. The question is not, we went into closed session and we can say anything we want because it's privileged and confidential. The question is what we are keeping quiet would work to be adverse to the city? That's the real question. And my question to you is, how do we put those checks and balances? What are they that we can put in place that will protect the public, you know, but will also protect the city when it has to be protected? I mean, I've been in, you know, negotiations, labor negotiations, collective bargaining, all that kind of stuff. I realize what it means to protect your position because you need to go out there and negotiate. That's not what happened here, by the way. So,
well,
but that being what it is, I just had to say that. And I apologize.
I mean,
for having said that.
no problem. But in all of those circumstances where closed sessions are permissible, it's one thing. And if you're saying that you can't veer from the subject matter, I get that. That's a different situation. But if you're having a conversation, a discussion about a problem with real estate development litigation, that is perfectly acceptable because you don't want the other side to know what your strategy is in litigation, because it is a big detriment to the city. It would cost a lot of money if you lose because and can't go forward with your own position. So I don't disagree with you that if there's something that is well beyond that's discussed. I mean, if you're all, you know, sitting around and shooting the bull and saying something totally extraneous during a closed session, okay, I get it. But for the most part, most people will go to closed session with their advisors or their lawyer or other members of the staff, depending on what the issues are. And you know, it's not so easy to have a rule that will, you know, talk about what is expanding out the conversation, because you usually have to have context. You usually have to understand, you know, what the other side is looking at and what the potential problems are to the city. And those are all things that you must discuss. You must.
Right. So about the reporting out.
Could we do round robin?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Can I say something? I just wanted to say something about just to clarify for the public in terms of agendizing or scheduling closed session. The protocol is the mayor schedules it after conferencing with the city attorney and the city manager at their suggestions. And that was way before my time, that has been the protocol. And I just want that, is that normal protocol in cities?
It's usually how it happens.
Okay, thank
I
you.
mean, something comes up and either the lawyer or some other member of the staff is going to say to the person who is the mayor or the chair of the board or whoever it is, this needs to be discussed in a closed session. And so, of course, you don't have to report out. There are certain items, if you have, say it's a real estate negotiation and it's not going to be a problem because you've come to a conclusion that you're going to negotiate in a certain way with the opponent, you can report that out. I mean, there are things you can report out without question, and you should if you've made final decisions in that way. But not in a way, you have to be very sensitive to how these things can impact the city.
So, as a litigation attorney, I am familiar with the concept that you recommend to your client that you tell the other side only that what you're required to tell them. I frequently tell people I'm preparing for a deposition, not to ramble on in your answer, only answer the very specific thing they ask. And I tell them everything you say can and will be used against you.
Mm-hmm.
And so the public needs to understand that there has to be some guidance and judgment on the part of our attorney to say, well, this is going to be detrimental if we disclose this to the entire public because our potential adversary is going to be the recipient of this information. So I know it's kind of a foreign world and maybe it goes against the grain for some people that want us to be, completely transparent about what we're considering. But, for me personally, the idea that you're going to hold your cards close to your vest when you're talking about litigation, you're going to hold your cards close to your vest until, you decide that it's your best strategy to bring that information forward.
Well, I have to say I agree with that as a litigator.
So I think perhaps one of the challenges that you're witnessing tonight is that we have two issues at play.
Mm-hmm.
One is having a template that we can all follow, as Councilmember Rule said, for moving forward, understanding what are our community norms, what are the guidelines that we're going to follow when moving into a closed session. So that's one piece, which is, I think, learning more and why you're here tonight. And then there's another piece, and that is since we've started, we have had so much division among us that it's not us against potential adversaries in a legal matter. It's us against each other and navigating how we as a council who are coming from different perspectives and not able, we have been able to unite on several occasions. And when we do, it's incredible and we get so much done. But the skepticism, the mistrust, and all of those things. And so I think that that's, why we're having a transparency workshop. And so I'm just asking, what kinds of, have you experienced this sort of challenge, and what do other cities do to bring back unity and bring back trust?
Well, I think one of the members of the public talked about a code of ethics and a code of conduct. And I really do think that could be helpful if you have, discussions amongst yourselves about it, so that no one feels that one group is being attacked versus another, but just something that will reinforce this idea of public service ethics. And in part, obviously everybody are entitled to their different views of different issues, but in order to be a functional council, it seems that there have to be some sort of baselines that you can all agree on that might be able to bring you all together more. And I know that James could probably laugh about this because I told him I was at the FEC, the Federal Election Commission, which is by far the most dysfunctional agency in the whole government. So I know a lot about that and about how you can try to work together. And sometimes it's not easy, and sometimes it never happens. It didn't happen at the FEC. I got death threats instead. So,
Me too.
Thank you. That's a great statement. And Anna, I just one sec, and then I appreciate Councilmember Rule's suggestion, and I echo Councilmember Whitman's suggestion for a code of ethics and conduct. And my question is, because I've heard that this happens in other cities, would that include a social media code of ethic? About what and can be said on social media by whom? In terms of teamwork. I think that would be really, really important.
Well, it should be, because that's one of the problems with actually it's a Brown Act issue. If there's a statement made on social media where there's been a decision made, and so that is can be a problem because it can be looked at as a violation of the law.
Thank you.
And I guess we can go to, I think the public is clamoring, but once again, I and Sousa says I repeat myself all the time and it's boring, but
You do. You say it to me all the time.
It's okay.
Yeah. I really would like us all to figure out the middle ground. I am not for disclosing those things that put the city at risk, but I am also, and I don't know that anyone here is, but perhaps they skew a little bit more on the conservative, protective side than I do. But I think we need to figure out a process by which we go into closed session, right? I think that we need to figure that out. It shouldn't just be one person with the city attorney who decides that we go into closed session. It can be, but it has not seemed fair to me that has occurred. It seems to me that in everything else, you need at least two people, possibly three. And so there's one thing, but also how we report out, once again, how we agendize, how we report out, how we figure out what we can tell the public and what we shouldn't tell the public.
I think one of the problems with trying to get some, say a majority to decide to go into closed session, actually, or even two, really what you want is a sort of a decision maker that's going to say, this is an issue that has got to be subject to a closed session. And it may not be something that everybody else knows about. And it's totally valid to have the closed session discussion because you're all able to be in that closed session. Everybody's entitled to that. So it's not a question of the person or the two or whoever is making a decision to go into closed session. They're not reaching any agreements. They're not making any decisions. All they're doing is saying, this is a potential problem and we need to talk about it all together in closed session. So I'm not sure that that's
I would say that given the distrust in this particular council, that there may be an exception to that particular rule.
Well,
but that being what it is.
I think it's the appropriate way to go because you will be there in the closed session and you can say the same boring thing you always say. No,
Thank you very much.
And just
you said it.
Can I clarify?
Trying to
something?
make it.
And just to clarify, in the last 2.5 years since I've been in office, every closed session has been at the suggestion of the city attorney. Correct, Matt?
In consultation with the city manager and the mayor, yes.
Yeah,
And sometimes more.
And I think it's worked well. So. James,
recap?
yeah, go ahead, James. James has come.
I think, thank you. I know we're going to turn it over to public comment, but I just think it's a good opportunity to maybe recap a little bit because we're taking notes here. One of the goals of today's meeting was to agree to some proactive measures moving forward that can help sort of what I'm hearing is rebuild trust, I think, with everybody. And so I think at this point, we haven't made any decisions yet, but what I'm hearing is the idea of a code of ethics or a code of conduct. I think some of the key issues that we should include in there is I've heard concerns about in the past, maybe not taking clear votes and not really understanding if we all had a consensus, a commitment to follow the Brown Act and not to have serial meetings, which not saying that anybody's done that, but I think it's clear there's been concern about that occurring. So I think we have a commitment to do that as part of the code of ethics, a commitment to report out and take votes and report out in closed session, a commitment to more thorough agenda language, and including some social media best practices and spelling out how closed sessions are called. And I think all of those things, we'll kind of go through them more after the public comment, but all of those things are needed to do what I think we really need to do, which is just rebuild our trust with everybody. And I think that's the ultimate goal. So,
and Mayor, if I could offer two further suggestions on that front. One is, as an example, the Brown Act permits a closed session to consider facts and circumstances not known to potential plaintiff or plaintiffs if those circumstances create a significant exposure to litigation. That is an option for the council. We've used it in the past in various times, and it's created controversy because it doesn't tell the public what it's about. The council could, as an example, commit not to use that exemption until the council changes that commitment, and instead use one of the other options that would allow for discussion of something that may result in litigation, but disclose enough of the details, such as somebody threatened litigation in an open meeting, or somebody threatened litigation in a letter, or whatever the threat may be, to allow the public to have some sense of what the closed session is about without playing poker with all the cards face up. That would be an option for the council. The second I would note is that the council also, the mayor, per the protocols and per state law, which cannot be changed by the council, could call a special meeting on herself or himself in the past, but the council has to vote to approve every agenda. So the council could always choose, in a case in which the council felt that the mayor and the city attorney's recommendation to have a closed session was ill-founded, could simply not approve that agenda item. But I don't believe, my advice is that the council lacks the power to prohibit the mayor from calling a special meeting. Brown Act guarantees that power to the mayor. However, the council has to approve the agenda once set on the agenda.
Just a follow-up question. So it's a state law that the mayor, I'm just,
yes,
if it's a state law, obviously we can't change that. I did not realize that.
It's part of the Brown Act that regards calling special meetings, and the council has been advised on that previously by email.
Okay, so that the mayor is in the Brown Act is the one who
yes.
calls.
And
okay.
the phrase in the Brown Act is presiding officer, but in this case, that is the mayor.
Right. Thank you. Then I understand that we don't have the power to override that.
Correct. The other thing that is noted is reporting out. There is the Brown Act minimum reporting out, which often is nothing. Most of the closed sessions I've had with the city in the last 9 years, have not required a reporting out legally because no legally reportable action was taken. That's the minimum, and that has been prior council's direction. The council can provide different direction to go beyond the minimum if the council so chooses. And we have done that in the last closed session that resulted in this workshop. Mm-hmm. The council's direction was to shift the discussion from closed session to open session and to hold a workshop. And per the council's direction, as noted in that public report, I made a report above the minimums. The council can direct me to continue to do that. And I'd suggest that as part of this forthcoming code of conduct, the council direct that for each closed session is maybe held in the future, I would recap whatever votes were taken, if any, and whatever happened in a way that is reportable but doesn't shoot the city in the foot. And then the council could approve that report out, and then we'd report out as directed by the council. And that, I think, would sort of find that middle ground.
Yeah. Can I ask you a follow-up question?
Sure.
What is a reportable action? I understood that if a vote is taken, if a voice, so roll call voice. Okay, you go ahead.
Yeah. So the Brown Act, the section of the Brown Act that specifies each of the agenda items that is allowable for closed session also specifies what is and is not a reportable action. So it varies a bit by each action. But for example, real estate negotiations, final action taken to approve a contract to buy or sell or lease or do a transaction for real estate, that's reportable. But if the council's action is not the final action that concludes the contract, there's nothing to report out. So
Okay.
it's specified for each item.
Okay, thank you. And I guess my main concern is that we don't always default to the absolute minimum, that we default to what we can report out without putting the city at risk. And, you know, I understand maybe you have to skew closer, you know, you can't really err on the side of reporting out things that could hurt the city, but you also don't have to have the opinion that anything that you report out is a potential damaging piece of information. And because it breeds distrust in the community, as well as, I mean, it keeps us from being able to have discussions around what we are doing with the public's business. And, you know, to our point, this is the public's business. It's not private. You know, it's not a litigation between two individual private entities. This is the public's business, and we are making decisions for them. And as much as we can let them know what decisions and how we make those decisions, the better off we all are. And was basically my position statement. So I guess I got it in.
I'm going to suggest that we move to public comment. And do you want to say anything?
No.
Okay. All right.
No, I have to say, I agree with you. And the city attorney mentioned that it is only certain things that you shouldn't be reporting out from a closed session. In, of course, public session, it all needs to be public, but there are only a few things that you actually should be able to report out that will not be a detriment. And so, you know, obviously you're right. The public should know as much as is possible, but you have to walk that fine line.
And
So-
err on good side.
Andy?
I can
Yeah.
offer a brief example of that, Madam Mayor, really quickly. So using the real estate negotiations example, the only thing that's reportable is if the council signs a contract. It's the final action that creates a contract. For those in law school, offer, acceptance, consideration creates a contract. I would like to buy a coffee cup from Anne. Anne says, I will sell you the coffee cup for $5. Okay, I agree. Yes, contract. If the council never makes the final offer, but provides direction to its negotiating staff, then it's never created a contract, so nothing's ever reported out. But the council could report out above that say the council provided direction to the city manager to make a further offer on the property. Not revealing what would not be revealed is the amount of money, because that would show your hand to the other side who's trying to sell or buy properties applicable, but would go beyond the minimum. So that's an example of something that could be done were the council to so direct.
Well, and the same is true of some of the others. For example, the personnel exemption, because in certain cases, you would not want to report out what the outcome is, which is that you've fired somebody that you can't stand, as opposed to hiring somebody to be. And you always can report out that some person has been hired to be the executive or some other high-level position.
Thank you. All right, Andy, and then we'll move to public comment.
Okay, so just a quick question. I know that each time we've been concluded a closed session, I was in a big hurry to get out. But is it standard protocol to allow legal counsel to decide what's going to be reported out, or is it more normal to tell us all, okay, you have to wait so we can talk about and agree on how we report out?
Well,
What's normal for?
The norm is for the advisor, that is the council, will determine legally which items should be reported out, and the whole council doesn't have to vote on that or weigh in on that.
I think speaking to, sorry, Mayor.
Go ahead.
Speaking to sort of the idea of defaulting, to transparency, I think that speaking from past closed session experience, we should be able to come up fairly quickly with, okay, here's what we think we can report out, and council tell us what you think. And if somebody says, well, I'd like to report this out, we can advise of the risk of reporting that particular piece of information out. So I do think, at the end of the day, it's going to be council's choice, but I think we can try to sort of think that way and advise council and the idea of trying to report out more than we have in the past.
Thank you, James. Okay, first we have Dee Reed, then Jeffrey Starkweather, then John Drucker.
Thank you for doing this. It's really important. And I think we did learn a lot. And I'm happy about some things. I'm happy. Well, I agree with Matt's recommendation. I think if you haven't voted on this yet, but I like the idea of fully committing to following the Brown Act. I think that's kind of a bottom line thing, and it's pretty obvious. But I also like the idea of getting clearer about protocol, getting clearer about what to do with the information in closed session that the public needs to know. They don't need to know the attorney-client privilege, but I liked Matt saying if votes were taken, maybe we should summarize what the votes were. And if it's controversial, you will decide whether or not you want those votes to be summarized. But the public does need to kind of know what's going on, that they can know about. They can't know about the internal discussions that have to do with litigation until the time comes for that. And I think, social media is a hornet's nest. So it's hard to control your First Amendment rights and all that stuff. But as elected officials, you could have a protocol about things that you cannot discuss on social media, for instance. That might be an idea. I don't know. But one thing that's missing is, and that I really liked the DA's recommendation, was to record the sessions. That way, Rachel, I know you're taking great notes. I take a lot of notes too. I have trouble reading my notes, but I bet you can read every word of your notes, and your notes are great, but you shouldn't have that responsibility for the council. It certainly works for you. And if you have a record of the session, we're not going to get to listen to it until it becomes necessary. That's usually litigation. But if you have litigation without a record, the lawyers are going to be deposing every single one of you. And that's very, very costly. And you're going to be asked to try to remember what you did in that closed session a year and a half ago or whenever it was. So I highly recommend recording it, get some advice on how to do that well, get some advice on your security around it and all of that. But it not only protects you, it protects the public. And if we don't have a record, how will we, the public, know that you are in fact following the Brown Act? We want to believe that you are. We hope that you are. It feels like you have a good faith effort going on here, that you want to do that. But if you don't have a record, so that when the time comes, we need to know, what the hot stuff that happened in the closed session might be, then we're back to not trusting you again. So having the record is going to make that a whole lot easier. And I highly recommend that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dee. Next we have Jeffrey Starkweather, then John Drucker, and then Bill Miley.
Good evening, commissioners, citizens. Thank you for holding this session. I think it's much needed.
We're not commissioners.
Oh, sorry. I'm a commissioner. By the way, we have ex parte communications that we as planning commissioners have to reveal. I'll give you an example, one that I revealed, which is really not a problem, but Katie Donwin is the treasurer of the Democratic Club and I'm the president, and she was before us. I revealed that, even though I had had no conversations with her application. But I just felt that was important in case somebody going, oh, well, he must have just, done what she wanted or something. So I think being really inclusive about that sort of thing. I wanted to, obviously, you never want to disagree with your wife, want to agree with her about this issue about doing some kind of a audio or video. And it would actually answer Councilman Whitman's question. Why wasn't everybody interviewed? Well, if you had a transcript, you wouldn't have had to interview anybody. You could have just given it to the DA. He would know exactly what happened and any memos that went along with it. That would save a lot of time and be a more accurate issue. But I do want to, where's the time on this thing? Anyway. Oh, sorry. I just want to address this issue about whether this meeting was strictly on the legal issues or went off track. We had two lawsuits, only one which was technically announced. That's the Simply Ojai vs. City of Ojai. Then we had potential lawsuit, which is Becker challenging a rescission of the development agreement. And we know what that issue was. Matt has discussed it many times in public. It has to do with vested rights that they had. Okay, so if memos and this minor memo was about those two issues, then it's covered. But I think it went beyond that because it started talking about public policy reactions that the city could do with Becker.
Please don't discuss the content of a memo from the attorney.
It's closed session
I'm
confidential.
telling the nature. That's what I'm allowed to do.
Can I get an opinion from the
Nature
city-
was talking
Mr.
about
City
public
Attorney, can you
policy.
give an opinion? Just one
My,
second.
my prior advice was that the council should not allow disclosure of the contents of the Minner memo as it was a closed session document. It's unclear how Mr. Starkweather can cite its contents when it hasn't been publicly released.
But
I
it was
defer
in
to
the
the council
newspaper,
majority.
by the way. I
The
read
news-
it in the newspaper. What
The
is
newspaper never published the full Minner memo.
Okay. Well, the DA had it because it's cited here and he found it.
It's also unclear, to be fair, how the district
Where did the
attorney had
DA
the memo.
get that?
Okay. My point is, I don't know.
Where did the DA
But
get
anyway,
anything?
What
Oh
I'd
my
like to
goodness.
say is we all have trust issues about this. This, in my opinion, went into public policy matters, not litigation matters. And the only way we can know this is to reveal publicly the Minner memo. Now, you can excise anything that is about legal strategy with either of those two lawsuits. What is remaining would be the public policy issues I believe that are there. Thank you.
Okay, next we have John Drucker, then Bill Miley, then Wayne Maynard.
Can I ask a clarifying question to the city attorney? Thank you. Very quickly. City attorney is, or Mr. Ravel, whomever, I think Mr. Starkwater just said that public policy issues are not covered by the Brown Act. So that once again, and we can just leave this open, we don't have to answer it. You know, if public policy issues aren't covered by the Brown Act, but once again, if they're discussed, is privilege, you know, wide and open? That's my question. So once again, you know, it's these kinds of questions that come up.
I'm going to jump in briefly if I can, ahead of Ms. Ravel. To protect the city, the Minner memo has several privileges. The closed session privilege exists regarding the discussions of it, as is currently under great debate. The document is also written by a lawyer at the request of the council for advice on a variety of legal issues. The document is subject to the attorney-client privilege in full, without regard to the Brown Act.
Okay.
So the document cannot be released absent a majority vote by the city council, and there has not been any such vote. That's a different question about the discussion. So the document is privileged in full, without question.
Right.
Under the attorney-client privilege
Right.
under Roberts versus Palmdale, as cited in my memo.
Right.
That is without question, unless the council majority waives that privilege, which they have not done. And I look to the council for if there's desire to do so. I would not recommend it. As to the discussions in the closed session, and here I'll turn to Ms. Ravel as well. My advice is that the discussions in closed session remain privileged. The DA has opined the closed session wasn't lawfully held, and as noted, we have a series of remedial strategies for that. The DA hasn't opined that the closed session discussions can still be publicly released. In fact, he opined the opposite.
And I want to just draw the distinction between public policy and politics, because the Brown Act speaks to politics and that you can't have a discussion in closed session solely on a political problem but not policy, because policy is always relevant to as was said by the city attorney, it's always relevant to the subject matter of, you know, what's permissible in a closed session. And so that there's a big distinction. I just wanted to make
Thank
that
you.
clear.
Thank you. Ann. Okay, John Drucker, then Bill Miley, then Wayne Maynard.
First, I want to say my heart goes out to you, Ann. You're in a hot seat here. You know, the people on the panel are understandably asking you all sorts of leading questions. You don't know all of the details of the facts, and you're trying to give kind of generic answers. And so I feel like we're not really going to make much progress here. The kind of your comments are taken as kind of a Rorschach ink blot and interpreted by the people however they want. Having said that, I just want to start off with the last issue about the Minner memo. Leslie Rule nor I have ever disclosed that as we promised. Jeffrey Starkweather, I believe, is mistaken that the DA had it, or that he had it, or that he's seen it, anything like that, because he certainly didn't get it from us. I think what he's confused by, and what the public is generally confused by, is that the title of the memo was disclosed back in January. And the title reveals itself that it presumed the city rescinded the development agreement and proceeded from there. Now, my question to you and the other lawyers in the room might be, if a closed session agenda is stipulating section 54956.9 D1, which refers to existing litigation, if they want to talk about threatened litigation, they should have noticed that under subsection D2. Is that correct? I want you to answer that after I finish my comments. Have the parties been identified? They're required to be identified in the notice by City of Lafayette case. Regarding confidentiality, 54963B says that confidential means it's specifically related to the referenced item in the statement. If it's not confidential. And what is not confidential is also not attorney-client privilege, because under Government Code Section 54957 point, I forget what, the Brown Act establishes itself as the sole determinant of the attorney-client privilege. So the
California Supreme Court disagrees with you.
the statute is the statute.
Supreme Court disagrees with you.
What is, I'd be most interested in hearing your authority for that.
The California Supreme Court.
Give me your face. Give me your face and citation. And don't interrupt me. I'd like extra time because of that. Thank you. And a little extra time.
15 seconds.
Take a few seconds. I just want to say the best practices would be recording closed sessions, taking votes on every issue, reporting out decisions. Any decisions should be the default mode rather than the exception, regardless of what the city protocols or any state statute says. That's my constructive contribution.
Thank you, John. Next, we have Bill Miley, then Wayne Maynard, then Larry Steingold.
Good evening. For the record, my name is Bill Miley. This regards the appointment of a special counsel to the city to defend the Becker suit. I'm confused. Currently, I understand it was discussed in closed session.
I'm sorry, but we can't talk about closed session. I just want to make sure that's.
I'm not going to talk. I
Okay.
know nothing about the closed session. Oh, okay. Well, let's see here. What
I will note that
understand-
the council has
This
disclosed.
is what I
his
commonly
desire.
understand from walking around and being a resident of the city. The appointment was made by the mayor, who got the city manager to use his special money under $30,000. He did it. At a later closed session meeting, I understood that council member Souza asked the mayor where she got the name. And she
Yeah,
said,
I think you're reviewing what was said in closed session, Mr.
I
Miley.
read
which-
it in the newspaper.
Well, that was illegal.
And also to say, and it's not correct either, just for the record. And I
Well,
think
see, it's
we've
not-
clarified sort of the
Okay.
facts of that.
I understand that that decision should have been made in a public open meeting, and that appointing the council, a special counsel, out of a closed session is a violation of the Brown Act, especially using a backdoor method, which ended up on the consent calendar.
I'm sorry, Mr. Miley, but this is closed session
I read
information.
that
Well,
in the
yeah,
agenda of the city council meeting. I'm not talking about anything that I got from the closed session.
Yes,
because
the contract was on consent, correct? Or I
don't-
believe that's.
It was on
Yeah.
consent and a public agenda, and has been previously reported and is in the packet for tonight's meeting. The council approved the hiring of Miss Minner. It was not done by any council member nor the manager alone. The council approved the hiring of Ms. Minner in a closed session, which the city believes is lawful. And the district attorney's letter did not comment on whether it was lawful or unlawful to hire special counsel. He did opine, of course, that the closed session itself went too far. But it was not, there was, just to clarify the record, the mayor did not hire Shoot Mahali. The city hired Shoot Mahali, and Minner works for Shoot Mahali per council direction by the manager. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to ask our consultant whether that should have been done in open session based on the Brown Act.
If you could do it on the mic, that'd be great.
Do you want to answer? I would say,
Yeah.
and I would say before you answer that, I think what we're saying today is that moving forward, we will try to disclose as much as we
those
can.
things.
In the past, the question was, do we legally need to?
Right.
So-
And it's in the past, it's not legally required. to do
Excuse
so.
me, I have a follow-up. By the Brown Act, it's not
Right.
legally required.
Mhm.
Doesn't mean it's not a good practice.
It's
It doesn't
Right,
mean
exactly.
or that Code of Ethics might have
Might have
taken care of it in some other way, which we
Precisely.
don't have.
That's
And-
right.
And I think that the DA did say that. He said that, he's not interested in the content, really,
Mhm.
right? Other than it missed scope, but if it's not a violation of the Brown Act, he's not interested in it.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
You know,
And
it's
that's
just like he doesn't
that's
care.
right. And that's right. That because he's looking at it hopefully
Right.
from a legal standpoint.
Right. But the citizens of Ojai might care.
Next, we have Wayne Maynard, then Larry Steingold, then Sabrina Venskis.
Thank you. Wayne Maynard, I'm a resident of Ojai and appreciate everything that's going on tonight. I've learned a lot. Really have. With regards to, Leslie, your question about checks and balances, with regards to the subject drifting during the closed session. Okay. I think that the city attorney, what I've learned tonight, kind of sets what that standard is, but all 5 of you are the checks. Okay. I think that if any time you feel it's drifting too far, you, under the rules of Robert's rules, I don't know what rules you use, but under Robert's rules, you can make a point of order and you state your point of order. The chairman then rules on it and you either proceed or you challenge the chair's opinion, and then it goes to a vote. And then you're all back on the same page and you move on. And that's the checks and balance process that I think works really well. Thank you.
Thank you, Wayne.
A quick comment to Wayne. I wish we had known that on our first council meeting and our second council meeting and our third council meeting that we're all in closed session.
Next, we have Larry Steingold, then Sabrina Venskis, then Tisha Norris.
Larry Steingold, resident, citizen, and I'm tired. We shouldn't have trust issues. I trust my city councilor. I trust the mayor. I trust everybody. And that's very nice. And that's why we have minutes and we have audio minutes and we have video minutes of this meeting, of which you're videoing. And if I swore and said something nasty or said something out of order, you'd rip me another one and send me packing. And I would fully deserve it. Okay. No, I do. I'm sure I do. Okay. But we have no minutes of closed sessions. And while you may take documents, and I'm sure you're quick and shorthand, but you're also talking and thinking. And I don't know about you, but I cannot talk, think, and write at the same time. I try and I fail miserably. You have minutes, and the only way of legal evidence or anything is the minutes. Now, I've been in board meetings where we obviously don't write everything down because we're talking about everything under the sun. And I've been in law meetings with depositions and people go like this, and I'm sorry, and I did that too, Mr. Whitman. Depositions. But I really need you to record the meetings for your own safety. Do it for a year and have it sunset. Just keep it so you can color within the lines. Otherwise, how are we going to find out if you don't color within the lines? Is somebody going to narc you out? Is somebody going to call the DA? Who? No, seriously. If it's not this city council, it's the next city council. Somebody's got to turn somebody in. And unless you have evidence, here we are. Solve your own problem. This is nonsense. Ever since the lawsuit on Becker, this whole city council in the city's been at a pile of crap. I mean, this is idiotic. There's no reason for this. If Becker's going to have a referendum and simply Ojai agrees to the referendum, drop the goddamn lawsuit and move on. I'm sorry. Cut it from the audio. Oh, wait, is it evidence? Fine, do that. Somebody's wanting to anyway. But seriously, please, I mean, it's your vote, it's their vote, record it. It solves your problems. It makes it go away so we can all move on. And then you can ask Mr. Levere for $3 million for the Maricopa.
Thank you, Larry. Next we have Sabrina Venskis, then Tisha Morris.
Hi, Sabrina Venskis. I live in the city of Ojai, and it's been a pleasure to listen to this expert talk. I've actually learned quite a bit. And so thank you to the council that invited her here. Since I'm the attorney of record in a case, a lawsuit that's been brought against Ms. Rule and Mr. Drucker for disclosure of confidential attorney-client privilege and information on behalf of 8 people that are longtime stalwart members of the community. I'm not going to be talking about the Brown Act or anything having to do with that, because I don't think it'd be appropriate since I'm one of the attorneys of record. But I would like to raise another transparency issue. I know that there's been some concern or talk. I've heard it. I've seen it on social media about this alleged improper disclosure of confidential forwarding of confidential emails by Mayor Sticks. I do practice in the area of the California. Did something happen? Can people hear me? Oh, the Public Records Act. And I just really wanted to share my impression about what I believe are misunderstandings about the nature of those communications. So the way that it works is when somebody's asked to turn over their communications having to do with an issue, a city issue, the council member is to turn over all those documents to the city attorney. And then the city attorney goes through those documents and decides whether or not any are exempted from the CPRA, from the California Public Records Act. Betsy Sticks was extremely transparent because she handed over all of her communications. Those were gone through by the city attorney's office. The city attorney apparently determined that none of them needed to be withheld under any of the exemptions, which means they're not confidential communications or emails. So when people are spreading misinformation about Betsy Sticks having forwarded confidential emails and that was improper, I think that one should that misunderstanding needs to be dispelled. In fact, if anything, Mayor Sticks is one of the most transparent people on this council. So I did just want to share that. The CPRA, California Public Records Act, is another transparency law and issue, and perhaps that's another issue that we should be talking about in terms of a code of ethics and helping members of the public understand the exemptions under the California Public Records Act, what's properly withheld, what's properly not withheld. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sabrina. Next, we have Tisha Morris.
Good evening, council. This shouldn't take long. Ojai has been known for a lot of things, and it's 200. How long have we been around? 200 something years. 101 years. But being experts on the Brown Act is not something I would never have thought we would become experts on. We have one of the best experts in the country on the topic. Thank you for being here. And we have lots of armchair attorneys and judges in the city and that come to the meetings every week. We have a city attorney that is quite experienced at the issue. We have council members who have studied at length the Brown Act, and we have come to this crux issue that is a great issue for a bar exam, and it's not going to be decided in these sessions. It's now come before a judge. 7 plaintiffs have brought a lawsuit to determine whether Ms. Rule violated the Brown Act or not. The DA has chimed in on it. Some people agree with the DA, some people don't. This is a very sophisticated legal issue that I wish we could just all agree on after tonight, that we leave it up to the actual attorneys doing the cases and the judges in the court system for them to determine it. And so we can move on with what the council is actually here for and to make public policy decisions and legislation for the city. That's what we have elected these 5 people for, not to determine case law on a state law. I mean, maybe, you know, sometimes acts are challenged and a new law comes from it. And that's great. But now it's in the court system. Let's let them figure it out and let the city of Ojai continue doing what it's best at. And that is being a voice and a leader for this community and other communities.
Thank you, Tisha. Weston, any comments online?
Yes, Mayor, we have one raised hand from Renee. Renee, you have the floor.
Thank you, Weston. Thank you, members of the council. I would like to clarify what I think is going on here. I did send a 15-page email that summarizes a lot of the background and the documents that would support this offensive situation that we've been put in by a developer who was trying to propose some housing for the city of Ojai. And some city council members said, wait a minute, you're not in compliance with our replacement housing ordinance. They went into discussions and came up with some replacement housing for low income and deed restricted housing. And now that developer is being raked over the coals and lawsuits are being filed against them because they're supposedly in violation of the California Environmental Quality Act. But really what I feel is going on here is that Simply Ojai, who is suing the city, who Betsy Sticks is aligned with and has been aligned with in her campaign, with her campaign people filing suit against the city, it is not right for the mayor to be sharing information about a contentious issue with those members who are suing the city of Ojai. Whether you consider those emails and that information confidential or not is not the issue. They are suing the city of Ojai. That is exactly what Leslie Rule is being accused of doing, violating the Brown Act. These people who are suing the city of Ojai, our mayor, Mayor Betsy Sticks, shared information about the agreement and about the development agreement. And then she made sure that an attorney was hired to try to reverse that decision and what legal counsel they would need to get to reverse that decision. That's what the issue is. That's what Mayor Betsy Sticks is trying to do. And as far as I'm concerned, that is an anti-development interest that is filing frivolous lawsuits, and we have many of them now, engaging in long legal battles, trying to focus on technical issues that we shouldn't have to focus on. And it's very upsetting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Renee. And just to clarify, no confidential information was shared, and the entire council agreed to hire an outside attorney. Is that it, Weston?
That's all, Mayor.
Before we knew.
All right. I'm going to suggest that we take a 5-minute break and then come back. Thank you.
Oh, this one's
We'll wait for Andy. I know. Okay, we are back. Oh, okay. We are not back. So talk amongst yourselves. Sorry. Okay, we are back. Thank you. And I just want to extend a huge thank you to Anne Ravel. It's been really wonderful learning from you, and we really appreciate you coming here and teaching us. So thank you. Very enlightening. And I'm going to suggest that we begin to direct staff to craft a code of ethics. So we're making progress. James, do you want to repeat that list that you mentioned?
Yeah, I think some of the topics that the council could include in a code of ethics, and I think we would assume are to be included unless we hear otherwise, is to ensure that we take a clear vote on items, that we commit to follow the Brown Act and not to have serial meetings or other things that could be construed as violating the Brown Act, that we commit to report out, to take the votes and report out in closed session, or report the actions from closed session to the extent that we can, to a higher extent than we previously have. Commit to more thorough agendas with more detail for our closed session items. That we commit to or that we include some social media best practices, and we also specify clearly in the Code of Ethics, Code of Conduct, how closed sessions are called, and include that information in it as well. So I think that's right now sort of the gist of it. So any other direction, any items to remove or any items to add?
Thank you very much, James. Any additions? Rachel? Did you want to go?
I was going to make a motion.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to say, when you say clear vote, just, clear roll call vote.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We'll figure out a way to say that clearly. So, but I understand the ideas along the lines of a clear roll call vote.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other additions?
This is just a highly philosophical position, is that we default in principle to transparency whenever possible. And that is our guiding principle. I think that's just hugely important. And from there, we branch off into what we need to keep under wraps, not, what can we divulge, but what do we need to keep under wraps? It's just a different perspective. And I think it's a much better one for the citizens of Ojai and for the public.
Yeah, I would just like to make sure that we add that we don't reveal confidential strategic information, which compromises the city's chances of in litigation.
Yeah. I mean, nothing that, I think that we all agree that anything that compromises the city or puts the city at any financial and or litigation risk is what we don't disclose.
Okay, we'll put some language in
okay,
and then
thank you.
it'll come back. To
Any other?
This is coming back as a draft and then we can weigh in.
Yeah, and I expect that we would, sort of fine tune it at that point. So.
Okay. Andy?
Okay, so I do have a question. It was repeated on more than one occasion in the public comments, that there has been a request that we record our meetings. And since we have an expert here, I'd like to ask that question, but I'm going to preface it with the idea that I represent healthcare facilities. When healthcare facilities have an unexplained incident, which means that some patient has an outcome that you wouldn't expect in the normal course, they're required to conduct an investigation. And my clients universally, conduct those investigations, but they don't make a public record of them. They don't make a record that the Department of Health can then come in, and it's been universally determined that they're not required to keep the recording and make it available to the Department of Health, because the purpose is that the healthcare facility, through their investigations, will learn how to provide better care. But if it's going to be turned over to somebody else for their criticism, it's going to turn into a weapon and nobody's going to want to say anything. So I think there's a big risk that if we go into recording of our meetings, that it's going to mean that nobody talks. So I think that it has a chilling effect. I think there's already been a chilling effect on our ability to conduct a closed session meeting, because there isn't trust about whether confidentialities will be disclosed or not. And we also will lose control. It's nice to think that you can record it and just keep it for ourselves, for our own, personal review. But, some developer can go into court and demand that we turn over recordings. And if you get the wrong judge, they can turn the recordings over, and we'll lose control. But I'm sorry, I'm speaking, and I should actually be asking the question of the expert who's here. So Anne, do you have a thought about the recording issue?
I do. The issue that I have with it, and why I think it would be problematic, is number one, what you said, because it will have a chilling effect on just the interchange on the council to have these discussions about things to be recorded. But secondarily, if they're turned over, for example, to the DA's office, the DA's office on its own does not have the ability to ask the council or tell the council that they have to record. Usually when there's a court order to force a legislative body to record, when there's been some clear evidence of a problem. And that makes sense if a court makes that order when they have already investigated it and see that there's extensive problems. But otherwise, what you're doing, it isn't a question of being transparent to the public, because you can take notes. Rachel's obviously good at it. And, so you can have that information, but I think that it sort of upends what is really the judicial system in a sense, which is supposed to be, if they see that you as a council or any other legislative body has done something purposely erroneously to violate the Brown Act, then that's when they ask that there be recordings. And it's, in my view, that is intended to be punitive. It's not intended to be necessarily good for the public in terms of providing that information.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ann. Well, Rachel wanted to make a
Yeah,
motion.
and a motion, no, we have discussion.
Well,
I mean, you can make a motion, sure.
Yeah, we can make a
Open
motion.
it. Yeah, but we can have
Sure,
motion
go
on the
ahead,
table.
have
Yeah.
a motion.
Okay, all right, go ahead, Leslie.
But wait a minute, we can't have a motion because we haven't settled if the recording is part of.
Well, we can have a motion on the table, but go ahead, Leslie.
Okay.
Yeah, I didn't intend that to be part of our
Well, I mean.
code of ethics or.
It is.
Yea or nay.
So, I mean, I just can't disagree more, the situation that we're in. I just can't disagree more. We've heard from our public. We've heard, it's the only way that we have any accountability. And if you're going to say something in closed session that you're scared the public is going to know, don't say it. I mean, it's really simple.
Because you're going to disclose it.
Let's
thank you, Andy.
one at a time, please. No interruptions.
Yeah, I do
You
have
can
a
be
question for you, Andy. But I'm not going to ask it.
We're a friendly bunch.
Yeah, we are. We've heard from the public. We have done things in closed session that did not violate the Brown Act, but were definitely ethically questionable. And we can't talk about it. I just feel so strongly that we must record our closed sessions. I don't see how it's of any danger to us. This is the public. This isn't a private entity, healthcare, old folks home who had a death and, it's like, oh, they're being sued. This is the public. And when we get into these questions, I think it was said over and over again, when we get into these questions, we have to be able to go back and say this happened or this didn't happen. And these kinds of things that the DA is going to put it on TV, which came, sorry. It's just, if we're going to start with transparency, let's start with transparency. This to me would be a huge mistake, just a huge mistake. The public will no longer trust us. They will not, because they don't know what goes on behind closed doors. They just don't. And we have no way of verifying it. It's a he said, she said kind of thing. And I think for this particular instance, it would be unconscionable not to record our closed session. There's nothing, what, are people scared they're going to say something?
Well,
Don't say it.
I respect your opinion, Councilmember Rule. I strongly disagree. We have a national expert with a resume that, you couldn't get any better than that. So I'm going to finish. I'm going to finish.
Go ahead.
And so I really think, what a gift. Thank you. You've given us. And I think it's really important to take an expert's advice. Councilmember Whitman, you would like to say something?
I want to say something.
No, I would defer to the expert. Obviously, I agree with what Ms. Ravel said, and I think that that's an option down the road. But as she pointed out, the DA does not have the authority to compel that on us, and it's usually reserved for, as I understand what she said, it's usually reserved for a set of circumstances where there was some deliberate effort to go beyond the Brown Act and talk in secret about, some public issue. And that hasn't happened. And I don't think that we should voluntarily create potential liability or disadvantage in litigation.
Susan?
Well, I think if I were a member of the public hearing what you just said and what was previously said, we're a small town. There's already the perception that things happened in closed session that were violations. That perception is there. And I think to record the sessions willingly is a way to make space for the public to begin to trust us. I have absolutely no concern about what I say in a closed session. I have no qualms about the meetings being recorded, and I would highly recommend that we consider that under the circumstances. And furthermore, I think we all need clarity. Once it's recorded, what happens to the recording? Does the city keep it?
It goes to the DA.
It would depend on exactly what the council selected as the option. The district attorney's prior offer was that him and his office would be glad to hold the tapes for the city under some sort of agreed upon lock and key system in which he would need permission from the city to view those tapes. Although mindful, once he has the tapes, little would stop him from viewing the tapes.
Well,
it could be also that the council could decide to record closed sessions and keep the tapes itself and not hand them to the district attorney unless the district attorney secures a court order to see a particular meeting, a particular tape.
I think,
or the council could choose not to record closed sessions.
Thank you. Sorry. But I think under the circumstances that with the public not trusting us, or some members of a good portion of the public not trusting us, it makes sense.
Quiet, please.
Makes sense to me. It makes sense that we record them, the city keeps it, and then if there's an issue down the road, which hopefully there will not be, because we will be adopting a code of ethics and other protocols so that the public has a better understanding of what's going on. What is the harm of recording the sessions and having the city keep them for and for a certain amount of time, and just as
I think you're right about if it was going to be recorded and kept. On the other hand, you have to remember that closed sessions aren't just about litigation, for example, and they're not just about real estate negotiations. And in particular, the ones that are highly sensitive have to do with personnel and have to do with other kinds of labor negotiations or monetary negotiations. And also if there's threats that are made to the city, threats about, potential damages to buildings or things like that, that's also an exemption that's provided. And some of that information should it get into the public realm, it would be really destructive to individuals in the community. And so that's it's something that you've got to think about in incorporating it, because it's not just, I
want to ask a question about what you just said. We're not obligated to record every session. We can decide if we could record the sessions that have to do with the current contentious issues, and not record sessions that have to do with personnel or something else. There could be a compromise that we don't even have to decide right now. We could have a closed session. No, but I would like a better understanding. You're giving us some of the pros and cons, but so my next question is, we are not obligated to record every session, are we?
Well, that's your determination.
Yeah, that's our
about whether you're going to record or not record. And also you could isolate depending on what the issue is, but I would suggest that that's something would be part of the agreement or part of the decisions that you make in the conduct about making those determinations about what is recorded and also how it's handled. Because as I said previously, handing it over to the DA is not a good idea.
Yeah.
Frankly.
Yeah. So just a point of order. This is agenda item number 2. Is that correct? This topic.
It could be part of agenda item 2. Yeah, I think that we were close to closing out agenda item 1, and maybe that could be held for that.
I think just to ask my colleagues, I really value the expert's opinion on this. And it's clarifying for me some of what I would, so I'm just asking if perhaps within the code of ethics, if we have a really defined reporting out system, if that could sort of stand in for building trust. Like that instead of agreeing to record, I think if we solidify this code of ethics, I think that it would build trust within our dais, and we could weave in provisions for transparency within that code of ethics.
You ready for a motion? Do you want to make a motion? But
Yeah.
let's put a motion on the table.
Okay. But we agree, we're not disagreeing. We need what you said. I'm stating that a recording of certain sessions, especially the controversial ones, and we keep the recording. What? I don't see a problem with that.
I don't have an objection to us
And
having a vote before any given closed session, whether we're going to record that closed session or not. But I don't want there to be some, generalized rule. I also think we should probably hear from Matt. And I think that this particular issue, we don't need to decide tonight, because I understand the whole thing is going to come back to us in writing, so that and maybe it's and that we can look at alternatives about how to address recording on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, can I?
Yeah.
Can I speak?
Yeah, go ahead.
Two things. One, the district attorney will sue us, and we will pay for that. That's the first thing. So we will be looking at the warrant tomorrow, and our legal bill is $47,000 for the month of March. That's the first thing. The second thing is, so we will get into litigation, and they will not let go. I mean, it's
true.
Yeah. Well, let's.
But anyway, I would like to ask the experts if that is actually true.
What do you mean?
The district attorney has threatened to sue the city if the city, his letter, if the city does not issue the unconditional commitment, which is item number 2. As best as can be seen from the written documents, the district attorney has dropped his request for the city to record closed sessions, shifting instead to the unconditional commitment process, for which he does have the power to force us to answer or not answer.
So he's not threatening to sue us if we don't record.
Correct.
Okay.
Not at this time. Although, of course, he could always choose to bring that lawsuit. There's no guarantee he doesn't choose to do that. But what he's chosen now is to offer us to make the unconditional commitment or not.
Okay.
And if the city issues an unconditional commitment, then that by statute blocks suit over those issues from the district attorney under that code section. If the city does not issue the unconditional commitment, then the DA can sue under that code section and could include as remedies recording closed sessions. But recording closed sessions is not the price of avoiding a lawsuit from the DA. The unconditional commitment is the price of avoiding the lawsuit from the DA.
Okay.
And
statutes.
Anne is shaking her head. So
Well, I have to make
I
a
just
second
wanted
comment.
to say that, you're right about that, except that the DA can't really sue you to require recording, because that's not within his purview. He just can't.
But he can take us to court to a judge,
Well,
which we will have to respond to.
That's true. But
Okay, I'm
any
talking about
individual
legal
could
fees.
do
I'm
that.
talking about legal fees.
No, I
But
understand.
just to clarify, he's not. Matt just
He
said
doesn't
he's
have
not.
that authority.
Okay.
Yeah.
And my second concern is that I don't necessarily, I mean, if we decide to record, I think we need to decide before we go in. We've done squirrely things in closed session. Nobody wants to admit it, fine. But we have done squirrely things in closed session. We've denied that we did them. And we've used the, privilege, confidential, didn't really, to keep the squirrely things from the public. And there's just no way to get around that. If we want to record them and, a week later decide to erase them, that's fine. We don't have to, we never go in for personnel meetings. I mean, we will for the only people that we have personnel, we would have a personnel meeting would be with James and Matt. That's the only, staff that we oversee. We don't have any labor negotiations. We don't have any collective bargaining. I'm just saying, we have done things that were not transparent. And I don't get what it benefits us. If we want to record, if we want to, erase it 2 months later when we're sure everything was good, fine, let's do that. But unless we record it when we go in, we have no way of knowing, what we're going to talk about, how we're going to talk about it, those kinds of things. I am deeply, deeply disappointed in this council that you would consider not recording, even given our history. And I don't think that our expert really knows our history. So it's contextual. It's contextual. So sort of textbook answers to the law doesn't deal with what we have been doing for the last 5 months. And that's also really important to understand. And nobody here chose to make any kind of statement to you except for me. Send you an email to give you context. You kind of walked in. I don't think you had any context. I mean, the last facilitator we tried to have, Sousa was like, nope, they have to watch the last 5 council sessions, so you can see what you're actually dealing with here, because this isn't a textbook. This is our community. This is our people. This is what we have done. And, no, we don't have to give it to the DA. No, we don't have to keep it, but we have to have a record in case there is a problem. I just don't see how that's a bad idea. And we will have to deal with the DA in one way or another, and that will be legal costs. I mean, maybe they don't sue us, maybe, I don't know. But how many hours did your memo take? You know what I mean? I mean, it just weighs out in a different way. So that's my statement. I just, if no one has any objection to recording them, because we can erase them. If it's an idea, we don't want them floating around in the world, then let a little bit of time go by and erase them and tell the DA that's what we're doing. Give them that bone and say that's what we're doing, because we do have contentious issues and we do need to look back over certain closed sessions. We've had them before. So that's my take on it. I'm deeply disappointed.
Once again, I'm really happy. Yes.
Council already took public comment on this item.
We haven't gotten to.
We're still on item 1.
Yeah, and I just want to make a comment. We're still on the first item. That I am very happy to receive expert advice. And I think that's exactly what we need. And then just to go back to this perception, use the word perception, Susan, that squirrely things have been happening. And that the reason why there's that perception is because Councilmember Rule decided to disclose closed session strategic information and push it in the newspaper. So of course there would be a perception that something's not right. That is my opinion.
Right.
Are we ready for a motion?
I'm just going to say that I disclosed very squirrely actions by you, and that was the problem. And I don't care what you say. Every attorney I've ever spoken to said what you did and what your partner in crime did was beyond the pale.
Well,
I would leave it at that.
I've gotten different.
I'm sure
Can I finish my sentence? I've gotten different advice from attorneys. So thank you. Go ahead, Rachel. Motion.
Well, I'm going to go back to the idea that there's been so much reliance on the DA. The DA was absolutely unequivocal that what was disclosed was a violation of the Brown Act. And yet I hear repeatedly that the right thing was done. So the law was broken, but the right thing was done. And I think that the idea of creating discord was used opportunistically, and that none of us would have had the way to avoid this happening is for a confidential session to be confidential. And that's why they're confidential. And I don't think that there's any good reason for us to record them, especially with the DA dropping that from his demands.
And to add to that, I mean, revealing closed session information is thwarts and jeopardizes the will of the people because they elected us to make decisions and we were in closed session to have a discussion. So, are you ready for a motion?
No, I just, the motion has nothing to do with the recording, right? Okay.
But, and that could still be
Because that is
discussed.
agenda item number
Decide-
2.
I don't
Yeah.
want to keep.
Yeah, no, that is
Right,
agenda item
okay.
number 2.
Okay. Who brought that up?
Andy.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
So I make a motion that we direct staff to write a first draft of a code of ethics that includes all of the talking points that James mentioned.
What's the ex parte? Did we include that?
Ex parte disclosures are required by law for decisions that are quasi judicial, which means that an entity in the decision has a due process right to a neutral decision maker, somebody with a will to win. The classic example is a contested development application pending before the planning commission of the city council in a quasi judicial capacity. Conditional use permit are similar, where the applicant and appellant have due process rights to a neutral decision maker, and that neutral decision maker, the commissioner or council, is applicable, must disclose ex parte disclosures, ex parte discussions that were substantive about the project. That does not exist as a legal minimum for policy matters.
I have a question. Can we add that to our list that we investigate ex parte ways to disclose discussions that we've had with parties that have things before the council, that have, whether they're quasi judicial, whether they're judicial. If you have something in front of the council and a council member has an ex parte conversation with you about it, that should be disclosed. I don't see how anyone could really object to that.
It can be added.
The council can certainly take a look at that. I would note that a significant amount of case law affirms the ability for council members on policy decisions that are not quasi judicial, that are purely legislative, to consult with whoever they may wish in making their decisions without needing to disclose it. But the council could go above that minimum and look at that as part of the code of ethics. We would look for direction from the council.
Okay. And just to close that up, I thought we had, at least in theory, decided that going above the minimum was a better choice for the community and the city of Ojai.
So
can we get the opinion of Anne? Do you have an opinion on that one?
Yeah. Well, you can do it as indicated by your city attorney. Generally, what you would be more concerned about than anything than having one conversation with somebody is if you then reach some sort of consensus and you say, oh, and council member Sticks also, or Mayor Sticks also is in favor of this, and then you should be in favor of this. And I mean, and that is a violation of the Brown Act. So that's the only concern.
Okay, thank you.
So what you're proposing, your motion is for a draft. So we can step back and have another round. Would you be willing to include that in your motion? That's part of the ethics under consideration is yeah.
I would ask
it's okay as long as you also indicate that ex parte communication with that third party or other individual doesn't act as a communicator of the information to somebody else. That's the problem, is if there's the moving. So that should be, that's what should be included in that.
Okay. So we can, I just have a quick comment. We can discuss that, but this isn't about a Brown Act violation. This is about an ethics violation. It's a different thing. We're not asking about what is to the Brown Act. We're asking about, is it ethical for city council people to talk to people that have things before the city council and not disclose that they had that conversation about that particular item? yes, I will agree. It's not a Brown Act violation, but is it an ethical violation? And should it be considered as part of our code of ethics, either to include or not? In other words, why dismiss it offhand now before it actually makes it onto the list where we can actually discuss it? Because it has been a huge problem in Ojai. It just has been a huge problem. We're a small community. I don't want to go into it. If you knew Ojai, you would know what we're actually talking about. So, why not?
Well, if anything that the council as a whole deems to be a potential ethics violation is certainly something that you could include.
Yeah, and I think just listening, I think I'm hearing two different conversations almost. I think there's technically what's a minimum that we're required to do, and then I'm hearing what should we do going above and beyond. So that is the decision of the council. There's not a technical answer to should we go above and beyond. That's the council's choice.
Okay. All right. Well, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
We were did you?
I'll second.
Okay. All right.
Are you amending your motion?
Yes, I will consider that.
Okay.
Yes.
We have a motion. We have a second. Could we have the roll call, please, Weston?
Yes, Mayor. Mayor Pro Tem Francina,
Yes.
Mayor Sticks,
Yes.
Councilmember Whitman,
Yes.
Councilmember Lang,
Yes.
Councilmember Rule.
Yes.
All right. Thank you very much. Okay. We will move on to item number 2, consideration of adoption of a resolution of the City Council to responding to the May 15th, 2023 letter from the Ventura County District Attorney with an unconditional commitment to cease and desist from Brown Act violations. We have a presentation.
I have a very brief overview. Most of it's been discussed at length. The district attorney issued a letter under Government Code Section 54960.2 that demands that the city cease, desist from, and not repeat past actions as alleged by the district attorney to violate the Brown Act. The past actions the district attorney alleges in sum are discussing matters in closed session that exceeded the scope of the claimed closed session exception on December 13th, 2022, discussing matters in closed session that exceeded the scope of the claimed closed session exception on January 9th, 2023, discussing matters in closed session exceeding the scope of the claimed closed session exception on January 10th, 2023, and disclosing closed session information absent an exception. As summarized in his letter, as summarized in my memo, the council has a choice. Under the statute, the council has 3 options and an inherent fourth. Issue the unconditional commitment in the form required by law, option 1. Option 2, decline to issue the unconditional commitment in the form required by law. Option 3, take no action. The inherent fourth option, defer consideration of this question to the next meeting. The 30-day deadline runs on June 14th of this year, and that is the day after the next council meeting. So there is time for the council to consider the unconditional commitment question on the June 13th regular meeting. If the council issues the unconditional commitment in the form required by law, that would prohibit the district attorney by statute from suing to determine the applicability of the Brown Act to those 4 past actions at issue. It would also prohibit anyone else from suing the city to determine the applicability of the Brown Act to those past actions under Section 54960.2. If adopted, the city must not violate that unconditional commitment in the future on pain of being subject to a lawsuit by the district attorney or others and owing attorney's fees if a final non-appealable judgment were to find that the city had violated that commitment. It also can only be rescinded once adopted with specified notice at least 30 days to the district attorney and at an open meeting on an agenda not on consent. It can only be adopted at an open meeting on an agenda not on consent. Here at a special meeting as a separate item of business. My recommendation to the council is to adopt the unconditional commitment resolution because doing so allows the council to prevent litigation from the district attorney, to demonstrate its commitment to complying with the Brown Act in the future without having to admit nor not admit, simply not admit the violations as alleged. The statutory form of the unconditional commitment is specified in Government Code Section 54960.2 and is baked into the resolution that is in the packet. And if issued, the council would commit unconditionally to not repeat those challenged actions as described above. And the how the council would do that is through the code of ethics and the transparency measures as just discussed. The council would commit to robust reporting out of closed sessions and to robust listing of closed session items on the agenda, and to sticking to those items with a healthy margin of error on the inside, stick narrowly to those closed session items and not disclose any closed session information absent an applicable exception. If the city does so, then the unconditional commitment will not be violated. Litigation from the district attorney will be avoided, and hopefully the council can look to the future.
Thank you, Matt. All right, we can move on to public comment for these patient people. Larry Steingold, Jeffrey Starkweather, and then Robin Gerber.
I just want to make a motion. I do.
Thank you. Larry Steingold, taxpayer citizen. Mr. Whitman, to use nursing home, essentially avoiding information on clients and should be patients who have been negligently or hurt or something to protect their business model should not be used as this an example, because it's a piss poor example. Sorry. Okay. Recording these meetings is a good thing. It keeps you from coloring inside the lines. Stay within the lines. Record everything. What do you have to be afraid of? If you're going to be talking out of school, shut the meeting down and go and close the meeting and go somewhere else. Go have coffee. Call it an open meeting. And Mr. Summers, his job is to make sure you stay within the lines. I'm assuming, is that your job while you're there? One of them. So it's his job to say, hey, you're coloring outside the lines, stop. But if you don't stop, can you shut it down?
Within certain exceptions, yes.
Okay, and if you don't?
We are where we are now.
Do you have an obligation to tell the DA?
No.
Who does?
I have no obligation to reveal anything that happens in the closed session absent direction from the council majority.
Even if they're violating the Brown Act?
Even then.
Are you sure?
Correct.
Okay. So who is supposed to turn somebody in? Who's going to fall on their sword? No, seriously. I mean, if it's not this council meeting, it's some other council meeting. Who's going to turn in your brother city council? Okay. And recording? Record. If a lawyer says, hey, we're going to sue, we want to get the records. If you're telling tales out of school, too bad. You shouldn't have been. It's very simple. Don't tell tales out of school. Stay within the covenants of the deal or whatever you're talking about. And don't. We all talk outside of school at meetings. Record it. Don't say things. Stop talking, which is what I should do. So thank you.
Thank you, Larry. Jeffrey Starkweather, then Robin Gerber, then John Drucker.
Thank you. Obviously, I would support option one. I do want to, though, because that option has the potential for us getting attorney's fees if we violate it. To me, that is all the more reason why we need some kind of either recorded or minutes. Now, I know we have an expert, but I was in North Carolina under the public records law of North Carolina. You are required to keep minutes in closed sessions in North Carolina. Likewise, our our county commissioners did keep a transcript of those things. And in North Carolina, when the item is no longer valid, so if you have a purchase of property, the property's been purchased or not purchased it, that becomes a public record if you request it. The same thing with litigation. Once litigation is over, that becomes a public record if you request it. Obviously, personnel is never a public record. Any kinds of personal threats, anything personal would never be a public record. So at the minimum, we ought to be taking detailed notes and have minutes of those meetings. I think it would be better to actually have a recording, because we have an option here where an example was someone was given 3 options of what they could do if they thought there was a violation. They could go to the DA or go to the grand jury. Okay. Well, if you did that and you don't have a recording, like Mr. Whitman said, how are they going to make a finding? That seems like a good tool if the DA requests it. Secondly, if someone's going to sue the city, you have deterred a city council member, anybody from suing the city, because they would have to have depositions of at least 7 people, all 5 of you, city manager, and the city attorney. And it would cost the city, because when you hire an attorney to sit in depositions, I've done it. I've sued cities. I've sued government. It can cost $10,000, $20,000 to do that kind of depositions. And the final one, of course, is that, which is, I don't know how realistic it is, that you could complain by talking about the nature and extent. I tried to talk about the nature and extent. I was shut down. I hardly said anything. So that seems like almost a non-alternative. So finally, ex parte communication should be dealing when you have an applicant, individual applicant, whether it's quasi-judicial or not. And the third thing is the statement that the emails that were forwarded by the mayor were not privileged. That was disproven by your city attorney when the Ojai Valley News asked to see the crossed out 90% of those emails, and it was told, we can't show them to you because they were privileged. Thank you.
Thank you. Any clarification on that, Matt?
Again, the news has requested hundreds of emails. I don't have the particular ones at issue in front of my head.
Okay, thank you. Next we have Robin Gerber, then John
That's
Drucker.
an incomplete reply, I think, from our city attorney. I didn't quite understand what you just said.
He doesn't know what she's referencing.
Let me unpack that if I could. Mr. Starkweather is contending that the comments that the mayor disclosed confidential emails to persons who are not entitled to receive those emails was shown by the city issuing redacted emails to the Ojai Valley News. I was asked to comment on that, but I don't have the emails in front of me, so I can't comment from memory on that.
Okay, but can you pull them up another time and
yeah, we can go figure out what happened.
And I'd like to know what happened. Yeah.
And I think the news has apparently reported on it, so we can figure out what is being discussed and get information to the council.
I mean, just to clarify, there were 2. One was about trees and one was about tenant protection, and you were on both threads, and you forward one too. So that's it.
But then there was things crossed out.
Well, can I just
okay, another day.
I think we need to finish public comment.
Right.
So next we have Robin Gerber, then we have John Drucker.
It must be me. If everything said in closed session had to remain confidential and in closed session, then we might as well not have a Brown Act, which is what happened before we had a Brown Act, right? You all went into closed sessions, said things that shouldn't have been said, malfeasance occurred, and that's why in 1953 we got an act saying you can't do that anymore. And there are times in closed sessions when it's the duty of the city attorney to say, just a minute, you've gone too far. You're talking about why the mayor should recuse herself. We've already talked about that in open session. So you know what? Let's not be doing that in this closed session. We need to go into an open session, hold that for an open session. That happened in 3 closed sessions. The DA found that there were 3 times, including that recusal question, when in fact, our city attorney should have moved those items into open session. And that's really what we're talking about. And it seems to me it would be futile for you. I don't know if I need this or not. It would be futile for you to agree to an unconditional commitment to abide by the Brown Act as requested by the district attorney, because you have a city attorney who insists in his public memorandum to you that despite the DA's conclusions to the contrary, you never violated the Brown Act. According to Matt, each of the DA's conclusions were wrong regarding closed session discussions that went beyond the rules for keeping them secret. Simply put, according to Matt, he's right, the DA's wrong. You're being advised to tell the DA we never committed a violation and we're gonna unconditionally commit to keeping that up. Such a commitment is no commitment at all. Mr. Summers is telling you to say you can commit the same violation again because he believes they were legal, but that's a sham. And in my opinion, it's poor advice that is likely to lead to a lawsuit by the DA against you. You know, here's an idea. Acknowledge the DA's authority and intent. Agree to record closed sessions. I do think it's a good idea. Find a new city attorney who will err on the side of transparency, or Matt, learn how to do that a whole lot better. And will construe the choice to go into closed sessions with care, who will monitor sessions with an ear for the public's right to know, and advise you in a way that considers that you are not schooled in this law. A city attorney who understands that you deserve calm, unbiased advice. And let me just add on the ethics board or the code of conduct, that you would have an ethics board as part of the code of conduct. So citizens can be involved in helping to hear what the cases are and decide. Thank you. And hopefully, Ms. Ravel, sorry, short-term memory, will discuss this one issue of what may not be appropriate in a closed session and how it would be stopped and sent into an open session.
Thank you, Robin. Next, we have John Drucker.
I take pity on you, Ms. Ravel. You know, Ms. Ravel was describing what courts have done to cities after litigation. We didn't go to court because we wanted to avoid forcing the city to spend tens of thousands of dollars needlessly in order to implement closed session recording. It's a pretty simple thing. Just record the sessions, and I'll get to in a moment. But first I want to address this legal, the ethics code that you propose. Ethics codes are all fine and beautiful, but these codes and laws are only as good as the people who have to comply with them. The Soviet Union had a beautiful constitution guaranteeing rights to all. They were never enforced. Forgive me if I don't trust three of you to make a bad decision regarding the ethics and whether ethical misconduct occurred. And that it brings me back to the recordings. Recordings are crucial. They are a record of what you said and did in closed session. And the only issue really is who keeps them confidential. I think everyone's in agreement that they should be confidential. And the only issue you have to decide is who decides to release them. You could have it be the DA, you could have it be the city clerk, you could have a court be the decision maker. Why, you could have Andy Whitman be the decider of when those things get released. But record the sessions you must, because that's the only avenue toward restoring trust in this city government. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Any comments online, Weston?
Yes, Mayor. We have two raised hands. First, we'll have Becky Windenwood. Followed.
We have one more.
My apologies. It's right here.
You come back.
Kelly Rasmussen. Thank you.
Hi, Kelly Rasmussen. So I think a lot of this, from my understanding, stems back to, and maybe you could speak on to it, and then maybe we can include it in the code of ethics about when to recuse yourself, because I think that's at the bottom line of most of this conversation. And I think we're talking a lot about what's confidential, what's legal to reveal, what's not. And I think you're using legalities to cover up a situation where you should have recused yourself. And I think that's something we need to address here and include in the code of conduct is when you should recuse yourself, what situations could arise where that would be appropriate. And it's just a disappointment to see that that's not being addressed here. We're getting lost in the weeds in a lot of details, but really one basic premise here is that there should have been a recusal. My understanding is that when you align yourself with a certain group, you're there to represent the city. When that group is attacking the city, as a representative, we're counting on you. And I haven't seen that, and I'd like to see that. Yeah, and I would vote to record these sessions, because if a recusal is necessary or there's a cover up, there's only one way to find out for sure, and that would be to address what actually happened. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Anne, do you have any comments on recusal?
Well, generally,
recusal occurs when there's a conflict of interest that is an economic conflict of interest, as opposed to, you may know a member that's involved, but you're not beholden to them necessarily. I mean, but if you are, then that's when there should be a recusal. I mean, I don't mean you specifically. I mean, anybody who's on the council.
Thank you. But working with like-minded people is different.
That's right.
Okay. Westman,
Wait,
any
wait, wait.
comments
I
on
wanna
that?
ask,
Go ahead,
you,
Susan.
you said two different things. You said that, you said, I thought I heard you say two different things, that there's a recusal if there's an economic conflict of interest.
Correct.
And there's also a recusal when there's an alignment with a certain group. What did you just say?
No, well, if there's alignment in the sense that, and it's usually economic. I mean, it's usually that you're getting some benefit from those people, and therefore you're not thinking in terms of what's in the best interest of the city itself. And I think that's what you have to look at. I mean, and in a way, there's not a fine line there, except that it is true that probably every one of you have your supporters and that voted for you, and that may have some strong interest in the outcome of some policy. And that is not necessarily a ground for recusal.
But the other difference is that this is an organization that's suing the city.
Well, see, I wasn't asked about. I didn't know about this specific.
But does that make it different? If the public perceives a certain council member as representing an organization that's suing the city, would that be something that at least should be aired out?
Well, I think if a council member is involved with a group that is suing the city in some way, that is people who you necessarily that you have a relationship with from when you ran for office or for whatever reason, the question is whether your decision making is going to be on behalf of the city's interests, or whether it's solely on behalf of that group. On the other hand, it may be true that the group has a good rationale for being concerned about the city. So, I mean, it isn't a straightforward issue.
I see that. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
All right. We still have more comments, Weston?
Yes, we have two raised hands on Zoom. First, we'll have Becky Windenwood, followed by Renee.
Who thinks I'm
Becky, you have the floor.
Thank you, Weston. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I wasn't planning to speak tonight, but I feel compelled to do so. So this will be sort of off the cuff. Prior to tonight, I was not aware that Ms. Ravel and the DA have only heard the viewpoints of Ms. Rule and her attorney, John Drucker. Based on the history of Ms. Rule and Drucker in revealing closed session information and then trying to control the narrative in the newspapers and on social media, I have no confidence that any recordings of closed sessions will not find their way into the wrong hands for the wrong purposes. Rule and Drucker created this whole drama for their own political purposes, they've been attempting to try the issue in the court of public opinion. And now, despite the advice of our esteemed expert, I think they are trying to present an argument for recording the sessions that they will likely use against the city and members of the council who may oppose them. So I have a great deal of concern about who the players are here. And I'm grateful that several members have, and members of the community, like Sabrina Venskis, have stood up and explained some things that these people have been spreading on social media that simply are not true. So until this social media and use of the newspaper to smear other council members stops, I do not think that recording closed sessions is a good idea, nor do I think that any closed session recordings, should that go ahead for some crazy reason, should be allowed to be in the hands of any of the council members without the agreement of all council members as to their accessibility. So I apologize for the haltingness of my speech tonight. I have not had a lot of time to think about this, but that is what I'm feeling at the moment. Thank you for listening.
Can I make a
Thank
quick
you, Becky.
response, please?
Sure.
I don't know you other than Becky, but I have no intention, never had any intention of keeping any kind of recording. Not ever entered my mind that I or my attorney, John Drucker, would keep a recording. So that's just misinformation. It would be kept by, not me, put it that way. That's all I got to say on that one.
I think that's important to clarify for the public that the recordings would never be in the hands of an individual council member. I don't think that was ever in anybody's mind, was it?
No.
No.
Okay.
Next, we have Renee. Renee, you have the floor.
And then now what about the point about talking to
Hello. I want to thank our expert for being here again tonight. I think you got dragged into the middle of a very contentious and basically violation of public trust situation that was thrust upon you to try to find some middle ground. And I see that it's been rather difficult and it's not really fair to put all of that on you. You've done a great job in trying to explain things. I personally do believe that Mayor Sticks should have recused herself, especially when her campaign finance director, Ms. Leslie Hess, is named on her election documents, and she has filed a lawsuit against the city of Ojai, along with Simply Ojai and her campaign manager, Tom Francis, where we've seen documented emails calling for meetings to talk about how to reverse the Becker project development agreement. This is all public information now that Mayor Betsy Sticks refuses to acknowledge even happens. And we've got the information in the public domain. So I'm sorry to put you in this position. I do feel that additional legal expert advice, and maybe it comes from the DA, maybe it has to come from the judge, but there have been violations of public trust, major violations of public trust. And I don't think that there's a small group who are using the public opinion to try to turn things against the mayor. The mayor has refused to even acknowledge any of this going on. So I would like to see the meetings recorded. I think the DA made a very strong recommendation going forward. At least for 6 months or a year, any closed sessions be recorded, since this issue has been contentious. And we know, Mayor Betsy, you have opposed the development agreement, and the people who elected you and helped run your campaign have opposed any development in the city of Ojai for the past few years. So it's very contentious. It still is going to be, and I do feel strongly that it should be recorded, and we need to get additional expert testimony to try to resolve our differences on these issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Renee. And just a correction, Sherry Ann Kate was my campaign treasurer. I do take the Brown Act very seriously, and my oath of office, and revealing closed session information is breaking the law and breaking my oath of office. And as much as I would like to be as transparent as possible, I take that very, very seriously. So I cannot reveal anything that was said in closed session. Thank you. Is that it, Weston?
That's all, Mayor.
Just a quick clarification. Leslie Hess was your assistant treasurer campaign for your campaign. She wasn't your treasurer. She was your assistant treasurer. She was your treasurer on your first campaign, and she was your assistant treasurer on your second campaign, just to clarify.
Can
I don't think she wasn't.
can I ask?
Yeah, go ahead.
But from my understanding, Leslie Hess had no financial interest in the lawsuit. And so that would fall under what you were talking about with this gray area where the lawsuit is a part of an organization or group doing something that they think will benefit the community. Like there's no financial interest anywhere. So I'm not defending the actions, or I'm just clarifying what you just said, that there's a gray area.
And from a philosophical perspective, like-minded people work together. That's what we all do, everyone in this community. And when there is no financial investment there. So I appreciate you clarifying that.
Can I make a
okay,
quick,
we're finished. Just one, no, but quick, but let me,
very, very quick.
Hey, Leslie, I'm running this meeting, so let me finish my sentence. We have finished, just so the public knows, we finished public comment. So we will move on to council discussion at this point.
Okay, thank you.
You want to begin?
Go ahead. Let's have. I mean, I would make a motion that we.
Do you want to have discussion first, or you want to go ahead?
I'm just going to make a motion that we table this until the next council meeting so that we can actually do a little bit more research. I really appreciate the expert, but there's all kinds of nuance here that you're just not privy to. And I think we need to really think this through. I totally appreciate you coming down, and I appreciate your expertise. But it's just, it would take too long to really bring you up to speed on all of the nuances here. And I think we should consider ourselves what we want to do. And I think we should, I just think that, like, I'd like to contact the DA. I'm not sure he's not going to sue us. I mean, I don't need to contact him, but I'd like confirmation that, actually this would be enough for him. Maybe yes, maybe no, maybe it's a misreading, maybe it's not. I don't know. But he would be able to give us some insight on what next steps would be. And we don't have the full breadth of information on what the consequences of recording or not recording would be. I mean, obviously I'm 100% for recording. I just don't see the downside of it. I see a lot of upside, maybe a little downside. I mean, yeah, someone could steal it. Yeah, someone could do something with it. But really, all of us on this table know that squirrely things have gone on in closed session. And, there's just no way to get around that. So how do we protect the community? And finally, I would say that our issue is not financial in Ojai. Our issue is ideological. In Ojai, nobody's getting any money off of anything. Nobody's getting any money off of a suit. They're not suing you for cash. They're suing you for what they want to have happen in the city. And that's a completely different thing. And that is not a conflict of interest. It is a code of ethics that you either live with or you don't. So
just a quick correction. George Gaines was my first campaign manager in the first campaign, not Leslie. Okay.
Sure.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Treasurer. George Gaines, not Leslie Hess. So that was incorrect. Go ahead, Rachel.
Yeah. Well, one thing I just want to clarify, when you talk about, I really want to take this language of squirrely things happening inside the council. I want to break that apart, because what you're saying, you're grouping all of us into a category of people who are acting out of unethical. And that is, I don't see that at all.
I'm happy to have that discussion with you off, because we can't talk about it
one at a time, and we have an order in Andy's after Rachel.
Can I just respond to Rachel really quickly?
We're round robin. The only unethical thing, the only squirrely thing is that all of our confidential information was leaked to the Ojai Valley News.
It was given out. I'm
Hold on,
sorry
look,
you
no,
feel
wait,
that way,
wait,
Rachel.
wait,
I'm really
I
sorry
feel
you feel that
completely
way.
betrayed. I feel like we here
I know you do.
we act as a governing body.
Conversation with her, Betsy.
It's not a
We-
conversation. Go ahead.
We act as a governing body. That means that all of us are a unit. We are all one, representing the people of this community. And when any of us break that the sacredness of the closed session, it has real personal consequences. My life has been a nightmare off and on for the last 6 months.
So is mine.
But Leslie, you did this.
I exposed what happened, Rachel.
Excuse
I
me.
exposed
Okay,
what
Rachel, you
happened. I
finished
didn't
talking?
do it.
You're talking out of turn.
So
Andy, you're next
there-
after Rachel.
So I'm going to table this part of the conversation, but I just want to clarify for the record and for the community. My ethics and my reputation are so important to me. I've built a career on my trustworthiness, and I want the community to know that when we talk about what happened in closed session meetings, that there's not the squirrely things, the closed session meetings were not squirrely. That's one. Now, the second thing is that, we live in, I'm going to throw in something else about recording. And that is, I've been attending all these workshops and all this information about AI technology. And there is so much people can do with a recording now that would be devastating for individuals, as Ms. Ravel said, and for our community. And, yes, if we as the council keep those recordings, we can't guarantee that a staff person down the road or that a future city manager who isn't James, or James has a bad day or has a mental breakdown, we can't assure.
Tomorrow night.
I mean, he might be on his way there. we can't assure. Yeah, exactly. I mean, any number of things can happen. And with AI in the way being what it is right now, someone could get a hold of those recordings and miscreate them. It could really be devastating. And so I'm concerned about recordings, but I do like Jeffrey's idea about taking minutes and having Weston or somebody take minutes. I like that idea a lot. And so that is what I had to say.
Andy.
All right. So I agree with what Rachel had to say. I don't believe that anything squirrely happened at our closed sessions. I think that the reason that there's public distrust is because instead of following the rule of law, which would have had called for a report to the district attorney or to the grand jury, if there was a concern about misconduct in our, that all would have played out. And, I think what is being accused of the majority, I guess, is that by the city council, is that there was something wrong in the way the agenda was prepared. Well, 3 of us weren't even members of the city council when the first agenda was prepared. So, and I've never understood it to be my role to prepare the agenda. And I've never understood it to be my role, to decide the scope of what we could talk about. I've always assumed that the city attorney would jump in and let us know if we were heading too far afield. And one of the things I'd say is that I've been an attorney 35 years, and I think I'm a very good attorney. But when people ask me for advice, if it is not an area where I practice the law, I do my best. If I believe they need legal advice, I do my best to send them to a specialist in the area of the law. And I have been relying upon a person that I understand to be an expert in the law of public meeting law. And anybody can read a statute and say, well, this is what it says, and the law is so much more complicated than that. And that's why I send people to experts when they ask me for legal advice. I say, that's not an area where I practice. You need to talk to somebody, because there are so many nuances in the law. Unless you've spent time, years in that area of the law, it's very difficult to give good legal advice. So I think that it's important for the public to know that at least some of us have only been following the advice of our legal counsel. And I think it would be important for the public to also support the idea that we retain a legal consultant who is the legal consultant to all of us. And we all, stick together with those things. It's okay for us to disagree on certain policy points, but on these core legal issues, we need to rely upon our attorney. And I think the reason there's distrust is not because of anything that the majority of the city council did. So there are only a couple of outcomes that my understanding when there's a inaccurate agenda. And the primary one is that the city receives notification that somebody believes the agenda was inaccurately reported. And then the city has an opportunity to amend the agenda. But then there's also the opportunity to potentially invalidate a decision and make the city council go back into decision making. These are all procedures set up so that we can reasonably and logically protect all of the interests of the public meeting law, which includes protection of the circumstances where confidentiality is required. And what happened here is that those rules were not followed. And so instead of it going to the DA who could somehow regulate what's happening, it went to the newspaper with all kinds of accusations. And importantly, as Rachel has said, Betsy has said, we're constrained. We can say that what's been reported is inaccurate as much as we want, but we can't tell you what actually did happen. But I guarantee you that things that were reported in that letter, I don't want to use the word lie, but they were not truthful. Statements were made that were not truthful. And I also want to say that there's been some characterization that this is a whistleblower situation. No, look, a whistleblower doesn't go to the members of the Ojai Valley Democratic Club and report to them first, because Renee Roth was reporting what happened during the closed session several days before January 4th. So it's not a whistleblower thing to go spread it around and then go back, eventually talk to the DA and say, I'm a whistleblower.
Do you want to argue? I don't want to argue. I don't want to argue.
So So I agree with the idea that we should bring, what we do in response to the DA request for conditional, unconditional commitment. But I want to say that the things that were raised, I have a little bit of a problem with, and actually, Robin Gerber kind of touched on this, and that is that I can't vouch for everyone. So in order to do this unconditional commitment, I'm not the one who creates the agenda, and I'm not the one who, decides what we report out. And I can't vouch for somebody that they're not going to go and report this to whoever, our confidential meeting to whoever they want to. And I feel no confidence that I can talk about important legal strategy with 5 of us. Because if it is politically advantageous to you to report it out to the public to create some type of controversy, some political advantage.
Point of order.
No, I can say what I'm going to say because I think our city government has been severely disabled by what has occurred.
Point of order.
The right to finish a statement.
And I have a right to point of order. It's a point of privilege. I have a point of privilege is that, he does have a right to his opinion, but what he's saying is patently untrue. And so, I would like us just to get away from
no point of order, because that's
no point of privilege.
That's a point of privilege. That's subjective. Could you please finish?
Yeah.
Let's time it.
Yeah.
I think that we should be, I think, unfortunately, that the entire city council needs to have, maybe we can talk to the League of Cities, but to come in and give us classes. Because I think what we're talking about, making a commitment, as Robin Gerber said, it means nothing unless you know what you're doing. And so we need to have people to come in and talk to us. I don't even know who creates the agenda, and I don't know who creates the report out. I think whoever those people are need to be in that training session. And I think that we need to be trained on what is confidential information. We need to be trained on what the proper and only processes you can follow if you disagree with what happened at closed session. We need that training, and there's no commitment until somebody receives the training and there can be some confirmation that they understand it. And so I think we should add all of that, and we can discuss that at the next session, but those are my comments.
Okay. Susan.
I wish that first closed session had been recorded. I wish the subsequent sessions had been recorded. And I want to go on record as stating that when I look at the pros and cons, I think it's beneficial at this, what's the word, juncture, to record the sessions and have them be in some lockbox. I trust James to keep them confidential. There's no reason why I wouldn't trust him. And we have 30 days to respond to the district attorney, and you're saying that the next meeting is not, and there was a meeting tomorrow, and then the next one is June 13.
That is within the 30-day period. It's one day before the period ends.
I would feel very good to make a motion that we issue the unconditional commitment resolution in the form required by law. And that we do the code of ethics, we do everything that's being asked of us. I don't have any, I'm comfortable with the resolution, and I feel confident. I don't know that if that we need to, I mean, we can always benefit with meeting with the League of Cities or whatever, but I've done all that. I'm fine to issue I'll make a motion for option number one. Issue, yeah.
Well, I agree with Councilmember Rule. I think we do need to postpone this to get more information on whether or not the city was in compliance with the Brown Act, because we did comply with the rules. And based on the information I have today, we were in compliance. And I think that's a really important piece of information to get out there and to research. So I would make a...
But my question is, can we still meet the deadline?
Yes. Yes.
I think that's a
So-
question for Attorney Summers to answer if he thinks we'll be at risk by having this discussion at June 13th meeting.
The risk would arise if the council cannot find a majority to take an action at that meeting. Then by default, you will have not responded to the unconditional commitment request, which probably invites litigation.
Might as well do it now.
But that said, there is still time on June 13th to adopt or not adopt a resolution, to make a conscious choice, as
I
opposed
would-
to a default choice. I'm still speaking.
Sorry.
And so as noted, it may be difficult to get a special meeting to have the trainings as discussed between now and the 13th. That component of Councilmember Whitman's request may be
No,
difficult
I
to pull
didn't.
off.
I didn't suggest we'd do that.
Okay.
I meant that we would commit to and schedule experts coming in to us, not in a workshop or anything else, and I know there's going to be Brown Act issues, but I just want someone to come in and lecture us.
I just
And
want to get something done.
That can be done. It will have to be in public with all 3 or more council members, has to be in public unless the lawful closed session, and Brown Act training is not a lawful closed session. That I can state definitively. So, but it could be a yes and. The council could adopt the unconditional commitment at the next meeting or tonight and commit to get training. And James and I were in discussion previously with the League of Cities staff and the Institute for Local Government regarding some trainers and training options. So we can certainly advance that discussion.
So can I recap?
But can I amend my motion to include everything that Mr. Summers, our attorney, just said? Because we do not have a choice. We have to adopt this to avoid possible litigation. Why would you want to wait?
I agree
To do that? Why?
I take my motion back. I was really talking about the motion to whether or not to record. And just, Rachel, if we had a recording, I could tell you what I thought was squirrely and you could tell me that you thought it wasn't, but we don't have a recording. We just have our own memories, and so therein lies de facto why a recording would be very helpful.
But he's not requiring that we make a decision about the recording
tonight.
Tonight. We don't have, we can have that be separate. I don't know if you have a different opinion. That's all fine with me. Just want to put my own opinion on the record.
I would
That's
second
all
your
fine.
motion. I would
Okay.
second your motion to,
I would like to make a substitute motion that we wait until the 13th and get some more information and explore it further.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, can we have the roll call, please?
Wait, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Before we vote, I would ask the city attorney and the city manager, if we were to postpone the response, would it be possible for us to have a representative of the council or one of you to actually sit down and talk with the district attorney and perhaps there's a way that we could get more information from him about and also just clarify some of what there's just never been an investigation. And so, again, I apologize for being so heated tonight. One of my biggest triggers is justice and what I do not want to have happen, when we go to any boards meetings in the city, in the county, people are looking at us, each one of us individually, as if we've violated the law. as if we've done something wrong. And that is something that is just not okay with me. And so this, however we respond is going to go on record as that reflects on all of us, our ethics. And so I'm wondering if there is a way that we can clarify some of the accusations, or that we could at least talk about it before we move forward one way or the other.
All right, we have a motion and a second, roll call.
Well,
Madam Mayor,
I think there's an
to that question.
inquiry by Lang, Council Member Lang.
Yeah, happy to answer that briefly. Yes, the council could direct city manager and I to inform the DA of the council's discussions tonight. And I do believe he's been watching by Zoom. He said he was going to. I don't know if he's still on, but he probably is aware of this. Second, we could send him the memo that he's already was sent, but send it again together with a request for him to reconsider the facts and affirm or change or adjust his request as he sees fit. We could also offer that every council member is available to speak to him and his senior deputy, if desired, regarding the events at issue. Because I understand that so far only Councilmember Rule spoke with the district attorney and not the other four. I can't compel him to pick up the phone, but I can make the offer. So we could make that offer as well if the council so desired.
That would be great. Okay, so is that a friendly?
And I would say that beyond being willing, I would welcome the opportunity to speak to Senior Deputy District Attorney Wald.
Okay, is that a friendly amendment?
So that's a friendly amendment to the waiting.
Okay, all right, great. So we're ready for a roll call? Go ahead.
Roll call
On
on the
the-
substitute
on the-
motion.
Yeah.
1 second on the friendly amendment. So I guess I'm just going to ask, what's being authorized? Are we authorizing or what's the direction? Is it myself to go speak with the DA, the city attorney to go speak with the DA, for us to provide a memo to the DA, for a council representative to speak to the DA? I think whatever it ends up being, I want to be very transparent so that there's not any question later about, who talked to the DA and if it was appropriate.
I mean, James, you are the most neutral person in this whole thing. And so my friendly amendment would be to have the city manager and the city attorney talk with the DA. Okay. And if he's not available to have a conversation, then to send a detailed memo of tonight's meeting and your perspective on his findings.
Okay.
And if he wants to speak to the four other council members, that would be an option.
We could make
also.
that offer too.
And again, I would welcome the opportunity to speak to him.
As would I.
The problem is that the meeting was not recorded, and we're all going to go and give the DA our recollections, and they're probably going to be very different from one another. And I happen to agree. Well, I stand by my original motion that we should do what the DA is asking of us.
Well, we have a motion and a second. Roll call, please.
Yes, on the substitute motion.
Can we?
Mayor Pro Tem Francina.
I'm sorry, Wes, can we repeat the motion? I mean, just repeat.
As I understand it, the motion by Mayor Sticks and seconded by Councilmember Whitman to postpone, plus the friendly amendment to have city manager and city attorney speak with the DA.
And to postpone to June 13th.
And to offer the four council members is available to speak to the district attorney if desired.
Okay.
Wait, listen, this is exactly what we did. We've done this before. We continue to, this means that we're going to waste another few hours next meeting on something that could be resolved.
But we have a motion and a second. We need to vote. Can we have the roll call, please, Weston?
Mayor Pro Tem Francina.
No.
Councilmember Lang.
Yes.
Councilmember Whitman.
Yes.
Mayor Sticks.
Yes.
Councilmember Rule.
Absolutely not.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Well, that concludes our meeting tonight. And I just want to thank all of you for being here and for a productive meeting. And once again, thank you to our guest, Anne
Yes, thank you for
Ravel. Much
adjourning
appreciated.
this.
We are adjourned.